Segment 1 is rolling.
In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome into the existence of strange things here on Radio Memphis. I'm Joel Martin.
And this is Stephen Gunther.
And tonight we are speaking with author, online radio host, and conspiracy theory specialist, Mr. Mark Sargent. Welcome into the existence of strange things.
Hi, guys, and thank you for having me.
Mark, we are going to visit with you extensively this evening, and thank you so much for giving up some valuable time tonight to sit in with us around our virtual campfire. Mm-hmm. You've got a book out there, Flat Earth Clues. Yep. Can't wait to get into it with you. But before we do, Mark, what got you interested in all of the unusual things in this world? Creepy, or something that goes bump in the night, or just plain mysterious?
I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to that. I was raised on an island, very rural, and so I was very sheltered. So I did not get into any creepy, strange, unusual, bizarre, whatever you want to call it, things until, in fact, my first conspiracy I didn't get into till I was after college. I literally did not believe there was anything sinister in the world until I watched JFK the movie in the theater on opening weekend, and then it's like, oh wait, people in authority do have the possibility of lying to us for whatever reason. And after that, I just started looking into everything that was unusual. Take your pick. I mean, I've looked at probably every conspiracy you could possibly think of, which is why it was so easy for me to delve into the topic of the book, which we will get into.
Where did you grow up, Mark? Where do you call your hometown?
My hometown, I was born in Seattle, Washington, up in the Northwest, the United States.
Cool. Yeah.
And I was raised in an island up there. So talk about sheltered. I was literally raised on a rural island northwest of Seattle, Washington, very close to Canada, named Whidbey, Whidbey. And I went through the entire public school system there, and it was tough to get into trouble. I mean, it's a long island, there's a lot of trees, and there's a ferry on the south end of it. It's the only way to get to civilization. So you can see Seattle and all the city lights from the south end, but you can't get there until you grab a ferry and hop on over, and that ferry usually shut down between 12 and 1 o'clock at night. And so if you wanted to do anything fun, you had to call it an early night, and otherwise you were kind of stuck. There's a bridge on the north end where they shoot a lot of car commercials, but it's an hour each way. And so yeah, that's where I grew up, was Whidbey Island.
So quite remote, and
oh yeah,
life was just kind of plain, but man, beautiful country though. Wow,
beautiful country, Bigfoot country. So, so
right.
We've all heard
Right.
the myths and legends of. I've never seen one myself, or know anyone that's seen a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Although most people think it's the Pacific Northwest in the United States that has the most sightings. The most sightings, believe it or not, and I only knew this because I dated a flat Earth girl up in Canada, on Vancouver Island. It's a giant island in the northwest of Canada, and they have the most sightings per capita of any place in the world.
All right, man, you get a couple of extra points with us tonight with that.
He hit the crossover category there. Nice job.
Yeah, good deal. Oh man, well, Mark, the flat Earth theory. The first time I heard of this may have been about 2 years ago when Kyrie Irving, the NBA All-Star, it made some of the sports talk shows that he was into this, and I didn't give it a whole lot of thought after that. And then I read your book, and I was like, well, here is somebody that's, they go against conventional wisdom and science.
Yep.
But man, you make a lot of good points, and you got a lot of really good stories in there. Love the story about Admiral Byrd.
Oh, thank you.
I had heard of it as well, kind of like you, sort of in passing, but I had never really done a lot of research on it. And your book goes into a lot of detail, and it changed the way I thought about some things, as I had never considered alternatives that you present that we'll get into. But it was very, very enlightening. Because again, I just heard it as a phrase. I sort of knew about it from, as you said, the NBA guys or just media people, but I had never really dug into it till I had read this.
Yeah. Yeah, it isn't. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, how long has the flat Earth theory and flat earthers? How long is this a movement, a theory? How long has all of this been around?
Not very long. So the new movement, the new wave of flat Earth. I mean, flat Earth has been around, of course, forever. You know, it was what civilization, how simple civilization viewed the world for most of what we know as history. Thousands and thousands of years. Well, I shouldn't say thousands. Our unbroken history only goes back 5,000 years. But for at least 4,500 of that, most cultures looked at the world as it appeared to be, which was, that we're the center of the universe and the sun and the moon and the stars are spinning above us. But that changed, 500 years ago with the whole Copernican model and heliocentrism and the Big Bang and all the other fun stuff that science started building. But this thing that I'm into now has only been around really for a couple years. The Flat Earth Clues, which was only made a book at the end of 2015, I initially wrote it in February of 2015. And I didn't even, honestly, it wasn't even a concept to me until the summer of 2014, which is not that long ago. And that's how I first got into it. Was again, knowing every conspiracy I could possibly ingest, I was bored with them. I was like, all right, I've seen it, done it. Name a conspiracy, I could give you some sort of opinion on it. Some I liked, some I didn't like. And I happened to stumble across a German guy who was doing videos on the flights in the southern hemisphere. And he was talking about how they just didn't make sense to him because these routes, all these connections. Your average person, the bulk of the population lives in the northern hemisphere, but in the southern hemisphere, they have a lot of problems down there. Even though there's a lot of big cities, you can't get direct flights between most of them, meaning 95% of the flights in the southern hemisphere between South America and Africa and Australia, they take these wild connection routes, which are going far north, double and triple the mileage they should be going. Anyway, this German guy was saying, well, and he wasn't a flat earther necessarily. He was just saying, look, it doesn't make sense unless the Earth isn't a globe, because the routes don't make sense. These connections don't make sense. And I thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. I get it. I didn't know German. I come from a pretty big German family, but German's not my language. But at the same time, I said, all right, it's interesting enough. So I started kind of poking around into it. And the more I started looking, the worse it got. I started pulling on threads that seemed to go into different places. And then finally, I got myself stuck in sort of a La Brea tar pit situation where I was into flat Earth deep enough that I couldn't get out. I mean, I could not prove the globe anymore. But that took months. Poking around different things and doing a lot of research. And it wasn't secret research. That's one of the reasons why this thing's resonating so heavily. It's you can look this up. I just connected the dots, and it turned out to look like a smiley face on a flat Earth. And in February of 2015, I woke up in the middle of the night with that weird Jerry Maguire movie moment where 3 in the morning, I remember it vividly, where it's like, okay, I'm going to go a different direction with this. I'm going to, because I can't solve this on my own, even though I consider myself a really creative problem solver. I'm going to make a video or a series of videos, and I'm going to put them out on the internet and let the internet hive mind solve the problem for me. It's like, okay, because basically it was a challenge. I said, look, I can't prove the globe anymore. Can you do it? Because I'm stuck. And that's what I did. I made my first video that night, or started that morning, I should say. Got up and the narrative was in my head. It was beamed into my head, if you believe in the spooky stuff. What was stranger was it was even in my voice. It's not like I was hearing voices. It's like, Mark, do this. Why should I do that? Nothing like that. I was literally, I could hear the narrative in my voice, to where I was in the shower going, okay, this paragraph's going to go like this. This next paragraph's going to go like this. Then I sat down and I typed out the entire overview of the flat Earth in, I don't know, less than a couple hours, and then said, well, grab a microphone. So I figured I'd narrate it, and narrated it and put it out there. And I remember a little apprehension when I first put it out there. It's like, well, you're going to put out a flat Earth video. Not many people do that. And you're putting your name and your phone number on there. People definitely don't do that. It's like, that's a dumb thing. But I did it because I wanted people to answer the question. It's like, okay, look, fine. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me how I screwed up in this. Where's my flaw in the logic? And the weirdest thing happened. The opposite of what I expected came to pass, which was people just started calling me immediately. People wanted to interview. Producers wanted to do special projects, and then somebody towards the fall said, a publisher out of London, they said, hey, we'd like to turn your Flat Earth Clues series into a book. And I said, oh, okay, what do I have to do? And they said, nothing, just send us the transcripts. I go, okay. And I send them the transcripts. Next thing you know, it's on Amazon. So, which is weird because I never intended to be an author either. And that's how this thing started, to where now 140 interviews later and 900 videos later, and just the numbers just keep stacking up. The community is monstrous. There's an international conference. I know I'm skipping around a little bit. There's an international conference coming up in the fall in Raleigh, and it's already sold out, and there's people coming in from all over the place to get to this thing. Media's covering it. Documentary teams are covering it. And I'm just floored by where it is. It is a journey, and at the same time, it feels like an amusement park ride that I really have no control over. I'm just along for the ride.
Cool. Now, this international conference coming up, any idea on the numbers of attendees?
Yeah, there should be about 1,000 people before it's over. I think the room can only hold less than 800. But I know there's people coming that have no intention of actually going in the main hall. They're just going to come to hang out with people. There's a cool acceptance thing when you get into Flat Earth. There's people that just want to be with other people because we don't have stickers on our cars or special badges or patches that we wear or anything. So you could know a Flat Earther right now, maybe walk down the street and walk right by him. You'd never know it. So, but people want to be around other Flat Earthers, and so there's quite a contingency, and I'm kind of glad it's on the East Coast because that means it's within driving distance of a lot of population out there.
Right.
So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I can't wait. And that's coming up on November 9th and 10th, so barely a month away.
Now, will you be doing some kind of keynote speaking?
Yes, I will. As a matter of fact, I was asked to do a keynote speech on the first day, so I'm doing a solo speech, which is really just going to be a Q&A. Because for me, it's not about me. It's about the people, and it's about who's out there. There's so many people that are going just to be around other Flat Earthers that I want. Let's say there's 700 people in the audience. Or 1,000. I'm not going to be able to come close to talking to everybody, even though I'd like to. I've been to meetups in different cities where there have been 50 people, and even 3-4 hours later, I still haven't met everybody because it's not like a really short conversation. It's not like you shake hands, say, "Hey, great," and 60 seconds later you move on. People, Flat Earthers, they're dedicated. They want to talk to you for a while. So the first speech or the keynote thing I'm doing, I'm gonna do a quick little summary of this and that, and then I'm just gonna open up to the audience and have them do it convention style, where they stand in a line and we give them the microphone and let them ask questions. Because for some people, it's going to be the only chance to talk to me, or to interact with what I'm doing. And I think I've only got an hour, maybe an hour and change with them. So I'm also going to give out, just have some fun with it. Anybody that stands in line and asks me a question, I'm going to give them an autographed Illuminati card. So that'll be kind of fun. There was a listener. I get gifts sent to me all the time, and somebody sent me 2 decks of the series, if you guys know, the Illuminati New World Order card game from 1995.
That's the Steve Jackson one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Steve Jackson one. Yeah. And did you catch, by the way, not to go off on a tangent, but did you see what prophetic card came up just recently?
No.
I go figure. So I get 2 decks here. I'll let me frame it for you. I get 2 decks of these things, And I'm not into it. I mean, but it's cool. I mean, I get it. You know, it's a cool conspiracy thing. And I give most of the cards, the cool cards, like the World Trade Center card and the Flat Earth card, which is interesting itself. The fact that there's 500 cards in this series, and one of the cards is actually Flat Earth. Go figure that would even be in there. And it's one of the only cards that actually has a little quote underneath it, and it says, "People laugh, but the flat earthers know something." I thought that was interesting. But I give that card, and most of the good cards I give to a co-host that I do a show with, Patricia Steer, and from Flat Earth and Other Hot Potatoes. I sent that to her. So I still have a deck, but it's mostly the lesser cards. And somebody contacts me, and they said, "Oh yeah, by the way, have you seen the Las Vegas card?" I was going, "Get out of here. You got to be kidding me." And they go, no, it's true. Look at it when you get a chance. And so sure enough, I pull it up on my screen, and I'm reading the Las Vegas card, and I was going, I wonder if I have this one. And each deck has maybe 50 cards in it, and I'll be darned, the Las Vegas card was in it. And so it's creepy if you know anything about it. It is an interesting tie-in to the whole thing. The initials, the cards, the blackjack cards, the singer's initials. It's amazing. Do you want me to break it down for you or not?
Go right ahead, man. This is good stuff.
Okay, so if you look, it's really interesting. If you guys want to have fun, just go into Google and type in Illuminati Las Vegas card, and it'll pop up the Las Vegas card. And there's some, there's not a lot on it. You don't have to pay attention to the writing because that's just instructions on how to play the card in the game. But the graphic is really, really interesting, because not only do you have a casino emblem up above and then a singing group down below on the marquee sign. That's minor, right? But what's also interesting, the bigger interesting, is the fact that it shows a jack of spades and an ace of spades right next to each other below the girl's leg. And jack and ace of spades happens also, so you've got a J and an A, which happens to be the initials of Jason Aldean, the singer that was playing when the shooting started, right? And then you think, okay, that's weird, right? Okay, I'll throw in a second coincidence for you. The Jack of Spades and the Ace of Spades also is a tattoo that he has on his arm, that exact card combination. Now you're thinking, okay, well, that's not that strange. There's plenty of rednecks out there that have a blackjack tattoo on their arms. Like, okay, that's good too. But the one of the more interesting parts is a jack. If you play cards, and lots of people do, a jack is worth what? 10, and an ace is worth 1. 10-1, October 1st, when it happened. Creepy. So yeah, it was weird. Anyway, I'm giving away that card.
Very, very intriguing. And how long have these decks of cards been around? These Illuminati cards?
22 years. So
I've
they
got
were
one in the closet somewhere, Joel. I'll dig it out. That's
yeah,
all
you
I
should
need.
dig it out. I mean, some of those cards may be worth something one day. And there's, some of the cards are not that great. I mean, there's one card they call the Alex Jones card. There's the Ed Snowden card. Where they're kind of.
There's a number of them. There's the new leader card that has the kind of a back shot of a charismatic leader, I think it was called.
Right.
Have like a very large shock of blondish orange hair. Might be prophetic, don't know.
Oh yeah. And the one that really got people interested was fairly early after the game, because the game was in 95, but in 2001, the terrorist nuke card, which looks just like two giant towers going down in a major city. And here's the what was really weird was, just out of research curiosity, when I was looking up those cards, I know because I pulled up the entire, you can type in Illuminati card game, all cards, in Google, and go through, like on Pinterest, all the cards. And I was looking to see how many cities were on the, because like, okay, well, Vegas is on there. What about New York and Chicago and maybe Seattle, and where there's only 2 cities. So there's a bunch of states and a bunch of countries, but only 2 cities. One was Frankfurt, Germany, and one was Las Vegas. I thought that was really interesting. It's like, okay, what the heck was Frankfurt, Germany for? So anyway, just to have some fun with it, I went on to eBay almost immediately, and there was only one guy in Europe selling, and he was selling them cheap because he didn't know, I'm sure, and selling 6 of those over in Europe. So I bought all 6, and so I think I'll sign those and give those away at the convention as well.
That's a good giveaway.
Yeah, I thought so.
Well, we're going to play the Flat Earth card here tonight.
Oh yeah, and again, why is there a flat Earth card in that deck? Of all the conspiracies, why is there a flat Earth card in the Illuminati deck? It shouldn't. It should not be there. You know, they've got several. They've got moon bases. They've got the NASA. The NASA card is also interesting because it shows NASA completely being done on a soundstage, Capricorn 1 style. In fact, the astronaut is like a cardboard cutout. And so the Illuminati card combo is the NASA card and the Flat Earth card right next to each other. And usually when you see them on like a Google image search, they'll be paired next to each other.
Well, I think at one point you or someone had referred to the flat Earth theory as sort of the mother of all conspiracies, because there's so many things are sort of encompassed and enveloped by the whole concept.
Well, it physically is the largest because it's the whole world. And every other conspiracy, with the exception of what happens when you die, is covered on it. And it is it's interesting. It is the biggest, no question. And for me, what it did was it put every other conspiracy that I know on a lower tier, on a lower shelf. And that, seriously, that's all I really. Even people will come up to me with other conspiracies. I'm going, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, even the Vegas thing. It's like, yeah, the Vegas thing was interesting, and it'll be short-lived because people have short attention spans, and
right.
But flat Earth is so monstrous it affects every aspect of our lives, which is why it has to be hidden, or has been hidden for as long as it has, and so well. They basically broken a lot of rules of, not even rules of power, just general civilization protocols to keep this thing a secret, and they've done a hell of a job so far.
One question I had just getting into it, just initially, why are you and some of the other leaders in the movement allowed to continue to bring this to light and add detail and add depth to the conversation? It seems like that's the kind of thing to be squelched.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this since day one. And it's one of the reasons I told people, I go, you want to know why this is legit? You want to know why this is resonating? And it's because I'm not getting any resistance. Nobody's even come close. They're not even trying to stop us. The token shots that they're taking at us, and they are that token. A perfect example would be the internet part of it, meaning if you go into any search engine and type in "the Earth is," or "is the Earth," or something like to that effect, it'll always the flat will always come up at the top of the search engine. I've done a little bit of developing, and that is not a lot of code that you have to change to make sure that never happens. You just keep bumping it down and bumping it down. It shouldn't be at the top of the list. I have countless emails and countless references from people that say that they got into Flat Earth because it was recommended to them on YouTube. It was literally on that little list on the right-hand side. It recommended for you these cool things, including Flat Earth. Or the other part of YouTube that really changed the game was the autoplay feature. To where, if you're doing the dishes or doing a project, when the video is done that you're working on, it'll just go into a video of YouTube's choosing that they think will be related to what you're doing. And no matter what conspiracy you're looking at, it almost always will cycle to Flat Earth, and in some way. And people just it's like, that shouldn't be possible. So if you wanted to shut it down with a very small amount of development, we're talking not even a half a day's work, you could make sure that never happens. All you have to do is say, I'll give you an example. Just say, look, if you see any video made with flat and Earth and multiple combinations of that, do not recommend it. Make sure it doesn't show up on the recommended list. Make sure it doesn't show up on the autoplay list. This is not difficult code. So you're absolutely right. Why haven't they shut it down? And that's because I think it's part of something bigger. I think it's the left jab before the right hook. And so it's just the frame of it's the frame for something where the canvas is going to go.
And just so the listeners know, you know a thing or two about writing code.
A little bit, yeah.
That's something that apparently.
Oh yeah. I was in the video game industry, computer entertainment industry for years, and I hired developers, worked with developers, and wrote in closedworld.com. I took web classes and decided I was going to build that thing on my own, and realized that there's a lot of stuff you can do with code. A lot of stuff is very, very easy when it comes to web development. And when it comes to internet searches, and we're not talking about a lot of change you would have to make. So stopping us, they have not done. Look, we have had no academics come forward and try to go after this. Now, part of it's because they can't. There's too many prongs to this attack, and they're not going to be able to stop them all. But even, take the world's most popular physicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Right.
He, even though he's a hated man, he's not really much of a physicist. I mean, he's really a mouthpiece. He just goes on stage with a microphone. He's good at that. I will say this. He has amazing stage presence. He can give fantastic speeches about science. Go rah science. But he doesn't. But he's never debated anyone in his life. They won't let him sit down and do debate panels or any shows where there's an argument involved. And even he, when he went out against the entertainer, the musician B.O.B. A couple of years ago on Comedy Central, the stuff that he brought to the table was terrible. And I knew when I was watching it, I was going, "Oh yeah, they're not even going to try." That was literally a token defense against us because they didn't know what to do. Well, it's not that they don't know what to do; they're letting it happen. And I'm still trying to decipher this, looking at the other side of the chessboard and trying to figure out what exactly they're setting it up for. Part of it's the open-minded thing, trying to get people to be open-minded for a concept that maybe was too big to just hit people with. And because honestly, anybody that gets into flat Earth, they're pretty much open to anything after that.
Well, it is very intriguing and very mind-altering to a new paradigm.
Right.
We are talking to the author of the book, Flat Earth Clues, Mark Sargent, via Skype tonight here on The Existence of Strange Things. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back after this.
Clear?
All right.
Excuse me, that was good.
Yeah, Mark, man.
Cool.
It's like you're just right here in the room with us, and just
Perfect.
having a casual conversation, and that's how Stephen and I like it.
Good.
I think in this next section, it's up to you guys, Mark and Joel, how you feel about it. But I think we should lay out more about the theory. Because again, you and I
Sure.
had heard of it. I mean, we knew an overview, but I think a lot of the listeners don't really have depth in what we're talking about and the concepts and the dome. And I think perhaps the second one, let's start to lay out sort of the big picture. Then we'll delve into the questions and people that would try and debunk and the deep stuff. But I think we got to lay it out because it was eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I can break it down for him. Sure.
I love the example you gave with the USGS logo flag and the United Nations flag.
Right.
I love that, and the
Thank you.
flat earthers symbol.
Sure.
That was pretty intriguing. But yeah, we'll start setting all of this up. The
Segment 2 is rolling.
Welcome back to The Existence of Strange Things here on Radio Memphis. This is Stephen Gunther,
and this is Joel Martin.
and we are visiting with our guest, Mark Sargent, the author of Flat Earth Clues, The Sky's the Limit. And you can also follow Mark on his website at www.enclosedworld.com. Welcome back, Mark.
Hey, glad to be back.
All right, we're Flat Earth Theory. We kind of talked about a little bit about you and your history and how you got into this, and I loved it that you just laid it out there with Flat Earth Clues, kind of one at a time and your own questions. It was so organic, kind of the way that you built all this over time and hive-minded it and everything else. What I'd like to do, if you can, Mark, break it down as simply as you can when we talk about Flat Earth.
Okay.
I think for me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say for a lot of people that don't know, I'd heard it. I could talk a little, but what you put out is far more complicated and precise, if you will, with much more engineering and thoughtfulness. I kept coming back when I was reading the book to intelligent design. Okay, as a phrase, because that's really kind of where you're going with this. It's purposeful,
Right.
and it's more than just a little Earth-shaped pizza with some little plastic forest trees on it. It's much more complicated. So kind of lay it out for us.
Yeah, and
Sure.
and with me, Mark, I've got to go back to grade school when we watched some kind of Disney cartoon about Christopher Columbus and
Right.
how they were afraid he was going to sell off over to the edge of the world, And when you think flat Earth, it's those kind of images from when you were a kid in grade school that come back to mind, like people believe a ship's going to go over the edge.
Oh yeah.
Before we got on, I brought that up to the old album art on the Kansas Point of No Return album.
Right,
That's kind of where
Kansas
I went.
Point of No
It's
Return.
always the ship going off the edge.
Yeah. In fact, you'd be amazed, even though it's an archaic concept. You'd think that I wouldn't hear that very often, but probably 1 in 5, 1 in 6 people will say, well, they'll use the whole cosmic waterfall reference. It's like, well, how's the water stay on? Why don't ships fall off the edge? Well, why don't you fall off the edge, and idiot, dumb, just call
How come
me
the
out.
cats haven't knocked everything off?
Oh my God, yeah, that meme, love that.
Yeah.
Because that's not the case. But I'll try to start off easy, because people that are out there, again, the reason why this thing resonates is the initial concept is easy. Just describing the shape to you, I can do that fairly quickly. It's the follow-up questions, which take a long time, because you're not going to believe it. Even if you say, okay, it's a dinner plate, right? It's okay, what about this? What about this? And so I start out with something like, for you guys, I'll do something like, let's do Shakespeare. All the world's a stage. How about that? You are literally in a planetarium. If you don't know what a planetarium is, how about a terrarium? How about a giant sports stadium? How about the Truman Show? How about something as simple as a snow globe? You're on a flat surface that is surrounded by a very large border and covered with a dome-like structure that houses everything you see in the sky, from the sun to the moon to the stars to the comets. Everything you see in the sky is no different than a planetarium. It is just part of a display system. You're in a sense a building. You're in a Hollywood backlot stage, although it's not Hollywood, it's much bigger than that. And you and everybody you know has been in it. Our entire civilization has been in it. And the reason why you never saw it, for lack of a better term, is that you couldn't see the forest for the trees. It's not your fault that you couldn't see it. You were born into it. And I'm not trying to use any Matrix reference here, but it wasn't just you. It was your father and his father and his father before him, going back hundreds and thousands of years, way farther than your family tree can be put in place, to where, look, we've been preaching the globe for the last 500 years. That's 20, 25 generations, depending on how you look at it. That's a long, long, long time. And it was hidden directly for a reason. So let me, to lay it more out, so we're talking about a disc-like structure. If you took the globe, as you know it, and you put your hand on the North Pole and you flattened it and trimmed around the edges to where it was sort of circular, more or less the continents would look the same. South America, North America, Asia, Africa, that sort of thing. There's only one continent that would look unusual, and that would be Antarctica, because if it's flat, there can be a North Pole, but there can't be a South Pole, because you're looking at something that's two-dimensional, more or less. I mean, not truly two-dimensional, but it's flat. So the Antarctica is actually a continent, a much, much bigger continent than we've been told. It's not this island-type continent like Australia sitting in the southern hemisphere. It is a massive, massive continent that stretches around our entire border. Now, just to clarify, because I get this question a lot, is Antarctica the edge of the world? No, it is not. The Antarctic coastline is not the edge. In fact, even Antarctica isn't necessarily the edge, because we don't know how many thousands of miles you have to go inland before you run into the side of this dome. When you get to Antarctica, for example, if you decide to take a boat down there, as you got closer to Antarctica, of course there'd be icebergs, but once you got to the Antarctic coastline, most of it is 100 to 200 foot wall of ice straight up, which is extremely tough to climb. And then once you got on top of that, the landmass, which is different from any other landmass in the world, it plateaus up almost immediately to 14,000 feet. And altitude sickness kicks in roughly about 7,000 feet. So it is extremely hostile. And there's lots of places in Antarctica that are even higher than 14,000 feet, 20,000 feet, 22,000 feet. So that will hold the water in. Let's put it that way. The water's not going anywhere. Let's just get that out of the way now. It's you're basically sitting in a giant pond with little islands in the center of it. The North Pole is the center of the map, and it's also the magnetic center. So you say, well, how does compasses work? Well, compasses work the same way. And people say, well, no, people have, I'm going to answer some of your questions in advance. Well, like Magellan, he sailed around the world. It's like, well, if you take your finger and you run it in a circle around your dinner plate, technically, you went around the dinner plate. Does that make your dinner plate a ball, a sphere, a globe? No, it does not. It just means that it's, you move your finger around it, and it works just the same. And your compass is also going to work the same. The compass is going to keep pointing towards the center, and since you think it's on a globe, you think it's pointing north, but it's actually pointing towards the center. You just don't know any different. I know this for an absolute fact because I've talked to Australian military who have told me, because it's an age-old question, especially if you're in the southern hemisphere, when does the compass flip over? Meaning, how far south do you have to go before it stops pointing north anymore and it starts leaning towards south? And the guys said the same thing. It's like, no, there is no South Pole. It's not there. It always points north. It just gets weaker and weaker as you get farther to the outer edge. Now, there may be a weak magnetic force at the South Pole, but that should not be. Remember, North and South Pole, they should be the same, but they're not. So and how high is this thing? So if let's say give you rough dimensions. So let's say this circle, this dinner plate is 20,000 miles wide. How high is the dome? That's up for contention. It could be as low as 400 miles. It could be as high as 3,000 miles. But either way, it's probably not that high arcing snow globe type of dome. It's probably like a shallow sports stadium. In fact, if you look at planetariums from the outside and you look at a sports stadium from the outside, the dimensions are roughly the same because you don't need a lot of altitude. We need a lot of area space, our human civilization. But most of our civilization lives in a very, very narrow band of altitude. Remember, 95% of us live in an area that's sea level to 1 mile high, because for obvious reasons. Because after 1 mile high, the altitude, the air starts getting thin, and you can't breathe as easily. That's not very high. Commercial airliners cap out at about 20 miles altitude. Cap out. I mean, best case scenario. I'm sorry, 10 miles. Ooh, geez, what was I thinking? Spy planes cap out at 20 miles. So you could even lower the ceiling down to 100 miles if you wanted to, if you wanted to be real efficient. And other than faking the space program, no one would know the difference.
Well, I'm sure it costs a lot to heat and cool the place, so we'd want to keep it,
there's bills, utilities.
But it's interesting the way you discuss Antarctica, that it's sort of the rim, and it's obviously, or appears to be obviously engineered or designed to be a barrier. What you said with not only the height, but you have all kinds of barriers. You have the altitude sickness, the climate, the temperature.
Right.
Everything about it seems perfectly engineered as a barrier, an organic barrier.
It's an organic barrier, meaning that it's negative reinforcement that doesn't feel like confinement. That's the clever part. And I'll use that word a few times, and that is there's some very clever engineering. For example, one of the most obvious examples, which people just take for granted, is adding salt to seawater. 3% salt solution. That's all it is. 3% salt solution, and you limit early ship exploration travel by 95%. Because remember, back in the old days, the limit to where a ship could travel was almost entirely based on the fresh water you could carry with you. If you could drink the water you were sailing on, they'd go for a heck of a lot longer. They would have explored way faster than what the builders of this place wanted. So, and negative reinforcement, meaning you think it's your idea. So like Antarctica, great example. When you're heading out to Antarctica, let's say you're doing wooden ships in the 1400s or 1500s. You get close, you're going to, salt water starts to freeze at about 15 degrees. You're going to start running into icebergs. Well, icebergs just throw absolute terror into the hearts of sailors everywhere. Even today, nobody likes an iceberg. And if that doesn't turn you around, fine. How about a 200-foot wall of ice when you get there? Fine. You think you scaled that? Great. How about no animal life, no plant life, no indigenous population, nothing you can sack or raid along the way? And oh yeah, you get some penguins on the coast. Who cares? Nobody eats penguins. So, and then, and that goes on for a long, long, long time. So you've got to take your supplies with you. Antarctica, metaphorically, screams, go away. But because it doesn't have signs saying go away, you think it's your idea. Eventually, it's just your tolerance. Eventually, you're going to turn around and you're going to think it's your decision. But it's not. It was set in motion that way. It's got so many negative reinforcements that you get to a point, it's like, I can't do it anymore. But there's no one stopping you. There's no 80-foot tall frost giant standing there with a big Viking axe, saying, you shall not pass, nothing like that. It's just, which keeps people's curiosity down. And nobody wants to go to Antarctica. Antarctica isn't even on the bucket list of most people. So there's so many cool little design features of this world. And when I was looking at it, coming from a gaming background and a development background, when I'm looking at it, that's what I started doing. I was like, okay, how would I build this world? If I had to build it flat, what would I do? And then what would I do to hide it? And then, then I had to look into mankind. And it's like, okay, when they finally discover it, how do they hide it? Because men in power aren't just going to give away information like that. They're going to try to use it to their advantage, and they have. So it's been brilliant. All the details that I've seen so far and all the little nuances have been very clever.
So we're in a large dinner plate surrounded by an ice wall,
right,
if you will,
yep,
with a dome over
yep,
the top, so
right,
enclosing us. When you get into your book, I'm thinking the sun, the moon, the constellations. You use the planetarium metaphor earlier. Is that really it, where we have a track with a light that goes around?
Well, I mean, it's probably electromagnetically powered. Probably has something to do with the unified field. But yeah, that's what we're talking about. I can't even confirm whether the moon and the sun are completely three-dimensional objects. They could be modified. I mean, I know, for lack of a better term, the sun is a spotlight and the moon is a giant nightlight. In fact, the eclipse, which just happened this year, which I had the privilege of seeing the full blackout in Salem, Oregon, at Ground Zero, that was fascinating because it revealed to us what we already knew. Because we took the images and broke them down into Photoshop because it benefited us to analyze them from a flat Earth standpoint, which was what exactly is happening with the sun. And some brilliant guys came up, they broke it down with Photoshop and tweaked the levels and said, look, and one of the quotes I loved was, there's nothing eclipsing the sun. And what he meant by that was, there's no three-dimensional object eclipsing the sun. It appears like it's eclipsing itself. It's self-eclipsing. I mean, it's self-dimming. And it's like, of course it is. Because in a scenario like this, the moon, when it does a waxing and waning crescent and a blood moon, we can do that in a planetarium now. You just tell it to. It's like, okay, moon, dim until you have a waxing crescent. It's something you can write in. It's easy. But we never thought of the sun like that because nobody's ever said anything like a half sun or a quarter sun. It's always been the sun. It's never been, only during eclipse do you notice things like that. And it totally went in line with the stuff that we've been looking at over the last year, most notably the moon. If you ever want to look up something really, really fun, the moon eclipse temperature, not moon eclipse temperature, just the moon temperature in general. And well, I'll preface it with, the moon is colder. And you'll say, well, of course it's colder, dummy. It's cold at night. Why would you even say something like that? I was like, well, no. What I mean is, the moon apparently is chilling. It's cooling things deliberately. It's not the nighttime is cooling things. The moon is cooling things. And the example I give is, okay, we've all been out in the blinding sunlight. They say, well, it's 90 degrees in the shade, right? It's like 100 degrees in the sun. It's 90 degrees in the shade. Why? Because the tree is blocking some of the sun's rays. Well, if you go on and look in like a summer day or in the moon, let's say it's a full moon, let's say it's 50 degrees in the moonlight. it's actually warmer in the moon's shade. It's like 60 degrees in the moon's shade. In fact, we've seen swings up to 13 degrees. That shouldn't be possible. And we've tested this with all sorts of fun things. Most notably, you want to have some fun, just grab a point and click. I've got one in my hand right now. Point and click infrared thermometer. You can buy them for like $15 now at the hardware store. They're used to test engine parts and road things, but they're very accurate and they're cheap. And that should not be the case. It should not be warmer in the moon's shade. Because if you believe in the relationship between the moon and the sun, science will tell you that the moon is reflecting the sun, some of the sun's rays. At the very least, it should be neutral, not have these degree swings. And I was the first one to propose, it's like, okay, what if somebody took a magnifying glass and magnified the moonlight? Because we all know when you take a magnifying glass of sunlight, you can burn paper and it gets warmer. What happens when you magnify moonlight? And we actually found it actually gets colder, even colder than regular moonlight. And that, again, should not be possible. And you're saying, okay, Mark, you're talking out your butt here. You don't know what you're doing. I'm going, no. This is something we can do now in universities. It's called a cold laser. We can do this technology. We've been able to do it for some years now. And that is you can use a modified laser beam and generate a beam that can refrigerate things. It's not like a freeze ray, not something out of Batman, but it's still pretty cool. And the bigger question is, why is the moon generating a cold laser? Why is that possible? And you say, okay, does this prove a flat Earth? No, it does not. Does it put into question the relationship between the sun and the moon? Oh, yes, it does. And if that gets put into question, science they have never even broached this subject with us. They won't even touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's like, look, anybody can go out there and test this in their own backyard. And it's an interesting facet. Sorry, I went off kind of into the weeds there.
No, the weeds is where we live. That's
okay.
A sweet spot. Right. Question on the eclipse. When we talked about the Antarctic border, if you will, and being an organic barrier, and seemingly our own good sense not to go any further, but then we talk about an eclipse, and we did a show on the eclipse. Joel and I both went out in various points of the country and took a look at it, and it kind of caught fire. People were very interested in it. It's a big topic. Yeah. If someone had to design this, which we'll get to, but I'll just use the term the designers, the dome builders. Why would you engineer an eclipse in it in the first place? What is the purpose of an artificial eclipse?
If you want to go way back into a story time, why do we even have the moon or the stars? If you believe the old stories and old legends, or I'm sure there's some scripture stuff in there about this. I don't know chapter and verse that well, but that is the stars and the heavenly bodies were meant to inspire. So why not the eclipse as well? If you believe in the really, really old stories, this world was built when there was no sun and moon, that it was just shades of light. And that as the world progressed and got more advanced and was decorated, it just got more and more complex. So celestial events like an eclipse, it works. And it also reinforces the globe model. Because don't think for a second that the globe model was inspired solely by man. It was part of our education, part of our schooling, part of our learning process, which is we've only been interesting in the last 500 years. But to do that, you had to hide the world. Copernicus, you look him up, even that man, he didn't even publish wouldn't even allow the Copernican model to be published until a certain number of years after his death. And that's because he wasn't sure about it, but it flourished nonetheless. So eclipses, just another part of wonders and amazements.
So, and possibly engineered in to perpetuate the myth of the globe.
Oh yeah, sure.
Knowing
why not?
At some point that we would get that far, we would grow that far, and that this would be something would point us back to the globe.
Yes, and science has to be cultivated also, because remember, without science, you don't get those sort of interpretations. Meaning, if science doesn't tell you, okay, those stars are nuclear explosions, and these planets are things that are bigger, worlds like ours, what's the quote I should use? God made the sun and the moon, but it was NASA that told you what they were. So take that for what it's worth.
You made a good point early on in your book about mankind and the 5 major religions,
Right.
on how, they went to war with one another, and, a lot of violence and just horrible things between them. But yet one thing they could agree on was the real Earth model
Right.
debate. I just found that kind of
fascinating.
fascinating.
Science seemed to bridge the gap between all people. That was science's big strong point. And again, no accident. It was, why would we all agree on this one thing? And that's because the creator decided that was the easiest way to do it. And so everyone's fighting. It's weird. This weird hypocrisy. It's like, okay, we're all in one world, but we're going to battle each other on it. Which was fascinating. But the 5 major religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they all have different tracks of where they were going, but they were all doing it on a globe. And all of them embrace science because they all looked at science as progression. And I have no personal beef with science. Look, you and I, we're talking on science right now. We're doing this show on science, science-based technology. But this technology, I should say, the scientism part of it, where they've kind of turned it into its own religion, that's the part I kind of disagree with. It's like, fine, you want to tell me the boiling temperature of water at sea level? I get that. Light bulbs, great. Air conditioning, great. Microwave ovens, most people don't even know those things work. But other than that, don't tell me, don't start latching onto stuff and say that it's under the science umbrella. Meaning, which is why I talked about the simple one was the core of the Earth. I thought that was probably the easiest way to tell people. It's like, look, science takes claim for things that they have no idea what it's about just because they don't want to hear your questions. By that I mean, okay, everybody knows out there what the core of the Earth looks like, right? No, you don't. You try to think back and you think, okay, well, you've seen the artist's representation of the Earth cut in half. Those perfect 1,000-mile band, thick bands of red and orange and yellow and the white glowy center. But when I say, okay, let's say it's 4,000 miles to the center of the Earth, how deep do you think the scientists have drilled to get that reading? And I'll come back. You don't have to answer it, and I'll say, well, it's not 2,000 miles, it's not 1,000, it's not 100. And remember, 1% just to the center of the Earth is like 40 miles. Deepest hole ever drilled is 8 miles. Period. That's it. The Russians and the Germans tried, and they tried for years and years and years. Could not go any further. Something stopping them at 8 miles. Drill bits will not work. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's a fascinating number to me because it's lower than we would all guess, but we have no reference point of why we think it would be larger. But
right.
Just,
well, I mean, 8 miles is very, very thin. I mean, it is paper thin in the grand scheme of things. You're absolutely right. Some people say, well, how thick is it? In fact, even the show I did, just Russell Brand, the entertainer, just entertained me a couple nights ago. And that was one of his last questions. How thick is it? And I go, well, I try to do the cross section. Then he started with jokes. But what I wanted to say was, look, if I had to build it, I probably wouldn't build it any more than 50 miles, maybe 100 tops, because you don't need it any thicker than that, because no one's going to go down there. Sort of like most people don't even go down 5 miles in the ocean. See what so anyway, but it does not have to be very thick. But let me get back to the scientism part real quick, which is at the same time, they only drilled down 8 miles, but in the cross sections, every illustration from age 9 to university level, they don't put in the bottom of those pictures anymore artist interpretation. Now you can look it up on Wiki, and in the small print in some of the places online, you'll say that they have no idea what's down there. But they don't like people asking questions. So at some point, they decided to take that disclaimer off of the pictures. Well, that's not fair, even remotely fair. It's like, okay, you just showed a 9-year-old a drawing of the Earth, and since there's nothing on there to contradict it as fact, it's now fact. He's 15, he's 18, he's in college.
Right.
It is absolutely fact. And they're going, what's the point? And I go, okay, the point is, who's to say the entire globe doesn't fit that scenario? meaning you put a globe in a 6-year-old classroom, same classroom, 12 years old, 15 years old, 18. By the time they're out, they are so conditioned. I mean, the CIA pays good money for this type of long-term conditioning. And we did it for basically nothing. Pennies on the dollar. Just put globes in a classroom. And you say, no, we've known, right? I was going, okay. This is my quick little rant. And that is, some things that are attached to science, but others you do not. Fire burns, water is wet, you drop your pen, it falls to the floor or the desk or whatever it is. These are things you can test right now. When it comes to the globe, this is something you're told. Plain and simple. Nobody goes to space. You don't know anybody that goes to space. You've never been to space. So if the scientists that were preaching that globe toy that was in your classroom for years and years and years and generations, for 400 something years, and they were wrong, would they tell you? No, they would not tell you. I wouldn't tell you if I was running the administration back then. Why would you? I mean, unless you're an extremely pious and wonderfully great person and is not worried about the civilization imploding on itself, you're not going to tell them because the narrative has gone too long. An example I've been giving recently is, let's say the Catholic Church figured out tomorrow that the Virgin Mary's name was actually Susan. Would they tell you? No, they wouldn't. The story is too far along. There's too many books that would have to be changed. Their argument would be what they don't know won't hurt them. The Virgin Susan remains intact, right? So, I'm sorry, Virgin Mary remains intact. So, and that's just a name. Imagine a scientific institution that would run into this problem. The potential shockwaves that would go through our lives would be that runs the risk of being you can't come back from it, basically. It potentially, and that's back in the 50s, or I should say 1960, or late 50s when they figured this thing out. That was the decision they had to make, which was, all right, do we as a scientific body shoot ourselves in the foot? In fact, even it'd be shotgun to the head, basically, because there'd be too many things you'd have to change, and you don't want to run the risk of really catastrophic repercussions happening. Sorry, it's been a little rant.
No, these are just incredible thoughts. This is it's a game changer. It makes your head want to explode.
Yeah.
But you bring it out so simply and easily and eloquently. We appreciate that. We are talking with our guest, Mark Sargent, the author of Flat Earth Clues, The Sky's the Limit. You're listening to The Existence of Strange Things on Radio Memphis, and we'll be right back.
Segment 3 is rolling.
In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back into The Existence of Strange Things here on Radio Memphis. We are visiting tonight via Skype Mr. Mark Sargent, the author of Flat Earth Clues. Mark, welcome back in.
Hey, I'm glad to be back with you.
Well, Stephen and I have enjoyed talking with you tonight around our virtual campfire, and you've really just given us a lot of good things to think about and probably think about when we sign off tonight. But when you talked about us being under this dome-like structure, you'd made mention in your book that somewhere around 1959, that the United States and the Soviet Union both kind of discovered the outer edge of this dome,
right?
And that kind of led, I guess, both governments around the world going into action and forming NASA and other space organizations to, I guess, kind of take that image away from us, or to keep us from.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not like they found it right away. It took a very, very long time for them. I shouldn't say relatively long time. They were looking at this thing, looking for the outer marker for the better part of 30 years. So, and really, it all came down to technology. Remember how we were talking about earlier about negative reinforcement, meaning ran into icebergs and hostile environments. And human beings really had no way to counteract that until the internal combustion engine was mass produced. We were toying with the internal combustion engine in the 1800s, but really until the Americans started messing with it in the early 1900s did we finally be able to exploit the technology. And by that I mean planes, not just those bipods used in World War I. The planes got exponentially better. And in 1928, so the thing I kind of joked with before was, let's say you're the king of France in 1500, right? And you had a map of the flat Earth. What could you do with it? Pretty much nothing. You had wooden ships and horses. With that technology, you were stuck. So until you had planes that could fly over the ice, you really couldn't do much. So in 1928, the Americans started sending their best guys out to Antarctica and just kept them flying further and further and further out. And it took, in 1928, you're not going to be able to fly very far.
Right.
But the missions just kept going, and they took a break during World War II. Because they had to fight the war. A little side note, out of all the countries that were down in Antarctica previous to that, only one stayed during World War II. Do you know who it was? Trivia question for you.
Don't tell me it was the Nazis, right?
Yes, it was. Gold Star, Nazi Germany. Straight out of Indiana Jones. If they could find a way to win the war, they would go anywhere. And that's what they did. And they were the only ones down there to where a very secret mission that's not exactly tied to Flat Earth, but it is interesting because the guy that headed up the counterattack, which still is shrouded in mystery, Admiral Richard Byrd, launched Operation Highjump, the only full-scale military operation in Antarctica that was public, in 1946, supposedly to root out the last of the German forces. But as you know, by the time he got to his press conference in 1954, there were no Germans to worry about. And what I mean by press conference is television appearance. I got to mention this. I'm kind of framing the U.S.-Soviet thing for you. So Richard Byrd, what he would do is he'd go down on these missions. Remember, he was down there for pretty much 30 years. The better part of his life, he was down in Antarctica just flying around in his own plane because he was a pilot as well. And he'd come back to the States or go around the world and do little tours. It's like, hey, I'm the greatest explorer in the world. Shake my hand, autograph, take some pictures, shake some babies. And he went on this American show called Longines Chronoscope back in 1954. It was a CBS show. And it was, I think, a watch company. And it's spelled Longines, if you guys want to look it up. And it's great. We were lucky to get the footage where it's very clear too. It looks like it's straight from the studio. It's awesome footage. And he goes on there. It's black and white, of course. And he's talking about Antarctica. This is 54, mind you, where he's saying, well, the place is pretty much made out of money, and everybody's down there. The Argentinians, Chile, New Zealand, Australia, Great Britain, the Russians, the Americans, anybody who's anybody is down there at the time. And he's setting up for one more mission. Turns out it was going to be his last, which was Operation Deep Freeze in 1955 to 1956. And that's when, that was one of those turning points for me, because I know that the world is based on greed and power and money. At least we are. The rest of the world is actually pretty peaceful, but human beings are based on that, on what we do. America especially, doubly so.
Gotta have those resources, man.
Gotta have those resources. So when he's down there and he's on this show saying that, hey, look, the entire place is just made out of money. You get a mountain range made out of coal that could fuel the whole world. There's oil, there's minerals, there's uranium, which he wasn't even supposed to say because uranium was not a well-known word in 1954. And he says, oh yeah, I'm afraid that we're going to start fighting about it down there. Of course, then he goes down to Operation, and in fact, he even talks about Operation Deep Freeze, that they're setting up for it, setting up a base camp while he's doing this television show. And he goes down there in 1955 and 1956, and that's when the world changed. So after Operation Deep Freeze, which was, let's say, the middle of 1956, starting into 57, that's when, after 30 years, that's Murphy's Law for you, though, isn't it? where it's like, well, we
Yeah.
can't find it. Because until, really, if you have the old maps, until you can confirm the maps, what do you really know? And they didn't know anything. So they but then in Operation Deep Freeze, they found it. They found the outer marker. Now they're not going to say it, they're not going to admit to it, but that's the only thing that could scare anybody off the ice. It's not going to be a frost giant. Everybody went off the ice at the same time, almost immediately. In fact, several things happened that were so monumental and so broad stroked that you're looking at it, you're going, holy smokes, what happened down there to freak everybody out? Because in 1957, after Operation Deep Freeze, everybody got off the ice at the same time. You know, every country I just listed off, they ran off that ice like their lives depended on it, and they all went and did specific things. Most notably, the Russians and the Americans, because Russia was the Soviet Union back then. Soviet Union was the only country that could really assist the United States in covering this thing up. And the first thing they did was they went back to their respective homes and they started firing atomic-tipped rockets straight up in 1958. And they did that for 4 years straight, both the United States and the Soviet Union, for no apparent reason.
Wait a minute. This sounds like kids shooting up bottle rockets on the 4th of July.
Pretty much. But isn't that what men would do? And that is, you find a wall, well, it's your first instinct. You're going to try to bust through it. And cannon fire is not going to do it. General explosives aren't going to do it. Well, we have atomic weapons. And the first 3 shots, the United States at least categorically admitted what they were using back then. The first 3 shots by the Americans were all in the megaton range. And you got to remember that megaton was not a word that anybody used back in the late 1950s. The Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were low kiloton weapons. Megaton is a scary, scary word. It's 1 million tons. It's a huge amount, a huge explosive. So the Americans, after those first 3 shots, you could tell the Americans, whatever they were trying to bust through, they weren't going to do it. If you can't bust through something with a 3 megaton weapon, you're not going to. So right after those first 3 shots, NASA was formed by the United States. And do not think anybody is out there that thinks that NASA is this peaceful, benign, Star Trek-y type organization. It is Department of Defense, United States military, through and through. In fact, it is uniquely military. It is based on the still burning embers of the Nazi war machine. NASA was founded by our half of the NASA rocket scientists that were developing the V-2 rockets back in World War II. Russia got the other half of them, and they were using those guys for their space program. But it wasn't the space program that you were thinking, and we'll get into that in a second. So, 1958, the NASA was formed, and meanwhile, the rockets are still firing up, for the next 4 years, and they both quit at the same time at the end of I believe it was 1962. Hopefully, it wasn't 1961. I think it was 1962. And they both stopped literally in the same day. And you can say, well, it was a moratorium. No, they were mapping out the sky. If you couldn't bust through it, at the very least, you could use them as glorified paintball guns and, figure out where the curvature was, because eventually you're going to have to fake the space programs and call it a space race. And therefore, if you call it a space race, higher degree of getting funding, better chance of getting the money from the government if you call it a space race, especially if you make Russia an enemy, which they were not. They have been in bed with us at the highest levels since day one, because this particular secret transcends borders. It is borderless, and they knew it. But you still have to militarize space, because the private sector, you can't let them get too high. People are curious. People loved airplanes and people love rockets, and you don't want to have corporations start doing things on their own. So what they did was they created a space race, and everyone got their money, and with all the nukes they were firing up there, they figured out what the angle of the dome was, because remember this, up until not that long ago, we didn't have a picture of the Earth from space. So, and you have to eventually produce such a thing, because remember, you've been showing people the globe for 400 and something years. Sooner or later, you're going to have to show them a picture, because everybody's got cameras now. and someone, you don't, so you have to control the picture. You can't let the private sector try to take their own picture. So the government says, no, we'll take care of it. That's fine. So they, in fact, let me use this little dig on the people out there that are trying to go, oh, this Mark Sargent guy, he's nuts. There was a great quote from George Orwell, which I put in the description box of every video that I make, which was a little short quote that he wrote an article for a British thing in 1946. And he was talking about the responsibility of science. He's not a flat earther, but I thought the quote was good, where he said that, if you go out to anybody on the street and you say, how do you know the world is a globe? The first response, he goes, it's almost always the same. And that is, well, we know. Duh. I mean, we know it's a globe. It's like, really? How do you know? And if you try to press them on it, they'll get angry. And what's interesting about that was he wrote that article in 1946. NASA wasn't even founded until 1958.
Right.
So how did everybody know on the street that it was a globe? It's because they were told. But now we're getting to crunch time. Now being told may be in jeopardy. So you got to show people a picture. But you can't just show them a picture, because what's the first question they're going to ask you? How did you take the picture? So you can't just hand somebody a nice glossy photo and say, look, it's our world. Because eventually somebody will say, hey, how'd you take it? Who took the shot? So it becomes the most expensive fake picture in history. You actually have to create a rocket program just to give the illusion that you can go high enough. You build a really, really tall rocket, multiple stage rocket. In fact, the Germans even wrote the script for it. It's in a movie. It's called Frau Mond, which translates to Woman on the Moon. Look up that movie if you get a chance. It's a silent movie with piano overtones. It breaks down the whole thing. I mean, this was in the 1920s they made this movie, where the big tall rocket, multiple stages going to the moon. I mean, cinematically, they blueprinted out the whole thing. And so that's what you did. You created this giant rocket, the Saturn V rocket. You fire it up, but then what you don't see, now of course we see it with all the rockets that we do, if you do a little time-lapse photography, it arcs over and goes almost horizontal within the first 150 miles. That should not happen. Look, it's a rocket. It should be able to just punch up. It's called escape velocity for a reason. But that's not what happens. So anyway, they faked the space program, and it was brilliant. It really, really worked. And I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but that's what happened in the 1950s and 1960s. The other thing that happened was, silently, behind the scenes, was that so NASA's founded in 1958. In 1959, the pivotal year of this entire thing, the most interesting year in the whole flat Earth theory, two things happened. Both were equally as important. One was that a NASA employee announced the Van Allen radiation belts and said that there's a band of energy up there made out of something, radiation that's super, super deadly to people. No one should ever go up there ever. Van Allen announced that in 1959. The same year, quietly, not in the papers, the Antarctic Treaty was formed, which says that no one can go down to Antarctica and do anything from a corporate level ever. Period. The end. And it's like there was no reason for that. Money and power rule the day. If my oil and gas company wanted to start fracking in your guys' backyards tomorrow, there's a good chance I could make that happen.
Right.
It's just money. Who am I going to pay off? What, it comes down to state and county and federal. I could do this. And yet my company, with its unlimited financial resources, cannot go down to Antarctica, even though the world's greatest explorer, Admiral Richard Byrd, said on television that it is ripe for the picking. I can't go down there. No corporation can go down there. As a matter of fact, here's where it gets even weirder. Not only can I not go down there with my oil and gas company, I can't even talk about it. And you're thinking, because people whine, they complain about all sorts of stuff. I mean, honestly, this is politics 101. I just go to my friend at the New York Times and say, hey, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of money. Let's run a full page ad every month saying how great it would be for Mark's oil and gas company to go down to Antarctica. I'm not even allowed to do that. There are quiet meetings behind the scenes probably under the guise of national security, where they talk with the presidents of different oil companies that are even thinking about it. I'm sure, they tap their phones and monitor their emails, and they just send an agent in. Doesn't he have to be a high-level agent? And says, look, national security, you can't go down there. And make sure other people know that. Any of your successors know that. Any junior VPs that are getting bright ideas, make sure they know that. They're not going to tell them why. They're just telling them they can't. And because of that, they can't do it. And this applies to every country that you can think of. Once you become an economic power, this treaty is put in front of you. And it says your country cannot set up shop in Antarctica. Ever. And you're thinking, okay, how does a treaty? Okay, first of all, there's no treaty lasts that long, and this one isn't even up for review until the year 2041. Second, how many treaties do you know are that unilateral, where everyone agrees on it? You mean China is going to agree with Russia, that's going to agree with America, that's going to agree with the UK, and just go on and on and on and on down the line where nobody complains? Look, the UK and Russia, they needed to rebuild after World War II. Russia was a freaking smoldering mess. They needed the resources. They didn't complain. Britain didn't complain. America, they didn't have to complain necessarily. They were the ones that were kind of instrumental in the whole thing. But it's a fascinating, even today. So and people look it up and it's like, no, dude, I can totally book a flight right now down see penguins. It's like, yeah, fine. Spend $15,000. They'll take you out to the peninsula. You can take pictures with penguins. You try to do that with your company. Say you're going to do something down there. Not even possible. In fact, if even an individual, say you want to go down there and you want to charter a plane or a helicopter. If you're going to try to go in the interior, you're going to have to go through multiple permits signed off by multiple countries. That's also the reason why they split it up into so many different fragments. Meaning, it's not that way. If you get through one country's barriers, another country can just say, oh yeah, we don't want you to do it. And then what are you going to do? You can only complain to your own country. It's ironclad and has never been broken. It's never even been talked about being broken. Millions of square miles of ice and snow and resources, and nobody gets to have it. Why? This is again the big question here. Why? What conspiracy is bigger than money? There's only two that I know of that are so big that money does not play into a factor. Right? What was the line from Vanilla Sky? 9 out of 10 problems in the world revolve around money. This one is so big that money isn't even an option. One of those, the two reasons is, of course, the shape of the world. The other is what happens when you die, life after death. Those are the only two things that are bigger than money. And that's what we're talking about here. A conspiracy that's so massive. You say, what do you mean it's bigger than money? Why would it? Well, think about it this way. Let's say I have an oil and gas company, and I actually start doing work down there. At what point can I go into the interior before all of a sudden I run into a fence set up by the government that says, oh yeah, by the way, you can't go past there? Because then it's tricky. It's like, why not? And then you have to get into debates that they don't want to get into. The second part is, I, having an oil and gas company, have very big and expensive helicopters, and one of them flies off course in a snowstorm. What if he flies off course and then can't figure out what's going on? His navigation system gets screwed up, and then he starts heading towards the outer marker. What do you do with that helicopter? Well, eventually you're going to have to take care of it one way or the other, and it's just too much of a hassle. The statistics say that eventually you're going to be tying up loose ends. And so at some point, very early on, they said, all right, it's just not worth the hassle, even with the resources. We can deal without the coal and the oil and the minerals and the uranium. Let's just make we'll just make it a no-go zone, and that'll be it. It's the same thing. It's the same tactic they used when they were doing the Apollo movies, which was or the Apollo sets, which was, okay, how do we explain, what do we do about the stars? Because the constellations back then were too tricky. If if the belt of Orion is in the wrong place and the wrong date stamp, you're caught with your pants down. Their solution was, well, there's no stars then. It's like, okay, there's no stars. We won't include any stars in any of the moonshots. And that's what they went with. And unfortunately, they screwed themselves, because it was one of the reasons why they never went back, because now you have to replicate it. You can't show stars now and not then. You have to you've got to be consistent the entire way through. So, sorry, that's my little ramble.
No, that is quite interesting and thought-provoking there, Mark. All of this talk about the government, you bring out into your book about the U.S. Geological Survey. and
Right.
their flag and symbol, and how it is almost identical to the United Nations symbol.
Oh yeah.
And then the flat Earth image, they all, you could stack them on top of one another, and they would almost line up.
Yeah, it was a fascinating thing to discover. And again, this is free information. This is not some hidden, none of the stuff I was doing, which is why one of the reasons I knew it was true, it was hidden in plain sight. Nobody could see it. Literally, it was right there in front of us. When I was looking at the maps, you can look on Wiki under list of map projections, and there's a map in there. There's a whole ton of projections, all sorts of stuff, heart-shaped Earths and square-shaped Earths and stuff. But there was this cool little circular map called the azimuthal equidistant, spelled Azimuthal, equidistant. And it's the only map that has any notations next to it, which I was odd. Every other map is boring. It may have a line, it's like who it was created by. But this other map, the azimuthal map, or we call it the AE map now, has all these cool little notes next to it. The first being that is used by, it's in the USGS catalog, which I thought was weird, as a projection of the Earth, an actual projection of the Earth. I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. Second was that it was created by the model was created by a 1,000-year-old, the model is a 1,000-year-old Persian scientist. That scientist isn't 1,000. I'm saying this wrong. The Persian scientist from 1,000 years ago made this, and his name was al-Biruni, and a pretty famous guy in the world of science. And I know he's a real guy, and I know that science, the mainstream science knows who he is, because there's actually a crater on the moon that science named after him. It's the al-Biruni crater. And then it has one more notation. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, this is also used as the projection for the UN flag. I was going, what? It's also the UN flag? The UN flag, but it's missing something. The UN flag, when you look at it, there's one thing missing there, and that is Antarctica. That was one of those out of sight, out of mind things. When you look at the UN flag from the top down, that's what we're talking. That's what we're looking at. But instead of Antarctica on the outer edge, they put these set of Romanesque wreaths on the outside.
Right.
And then the last part, which is why I linked the three, was if you go to the Flat Earth Society in Wiki and you look at the Flat Earth projection, it is that map. It is the AE map. But yet they're not linked together. The internet is notorious for cross-referencing everything. And yet here are these three projections. You got the USGS using one of them. You've got the UN flag using one. And the Flat Earth map is also using the exact same measurement projection. But two of them are considered completely legit and government endorsed, very government endorsed. And the third one is completely insane, because the first two are just projections. They're not literal. But if you consider it literal, well, then you're crazy. And I thought that was fascinating. It's like, here it is, right there. I mean, it is so simple. And, yet it's amazing what reinforcement will do. They'll just say, well, in fact, they don't even, when people talk about the flat Earth, they say, oh yeah, flat earthers are nuts. But when you look at the map, it's like, wait, the government's using this map. In fact, the world is using this map. The UN has been using this map since the 1940s. Even before, mind you, if the UN flag was designed in the 1940s, then they had this map before it was absolutely 100% confirmed by them that that's what the world looked like. Which is also, a dead giveaway. They jumped the gun, and I partially think that the UN flag would have been changed if they were wrong. Then they probably would have changed it to something else, but it turned out being right. And I think most of them kind of had a hunch that it was going to pan out.
Well, leave it up to us mere mortal humans sometimes just to overlook things and not completely think it through.
Right.
So it is compelling putting the three images together.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, watching them laid on top of each other. I mean, it is the exact same thing. And again, love the fact that Antarctica is missing from the UN flag. And I've told people this as well, nobody owns Antarctica. I'm going, isn't that alone kind of an indicator? Tell me a piece of real estate on this world that isn't owned by anyone. We own everything. We map it out. We lay a claim to it. We put it in every square inch of ground is owned But Antarctica is literally owned by no one. And you think that we're talking millions of square miles of prime resource material, and no one's going to lay claim to it. You'd think that, I mean, the metaphor here would be, or the analogy would be, wolves just it should be just salivating on the outside of this thing, and yet they're not allowed to even do that. They're, it's just this weird little enigma. No, I shouldn't say little. It's something that's been hidden from us, hidden from the general population, and I find it fascinating that more people haven't picked up on it.
Well, this is where I kind of jump onto the conspiracy bandwagon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
What incredible force is stopping corporations and private entities and countries from being there? It's funny you mentioned they all leave at the same time,
right?
And we as human beings that are fallible and greedy and want to get ahead, it seems like we won't let anything get in the way for us to get to the goods.
Right. Right.
But yet it's like everybody is repelled from this.
And you're right, where you don't have legitimate access, you have poachers. So you have other people that go in, whether it's an endangered species or a type of logging or anything else.
Right.
What keeps those people, who obviously aren't sanctioned, out from just running a bootleg operation?
Wildcatters.
In this case, it is logistically prohibitive. That's the shortest answer. Meaning, remember, the continent just naturally, environmentally screams go away. It is cold. There is nothing good there. There's also, I mean, you have a good chance of some of your team members dying just hanging out there, if somebody gets lost. So, and you keep it out of sight, out of mind. And you now, between the environmental treaties and the normal treaties. Remember, the environmental treaties, they came along much, much later, which is why I argued. I said, look, because people nowadays, they say, well, environmental treaties, and people take that very seriously. I'm going, well, not in 1959. 1959, I mean, Greenpeace literally was not founded until 1972. So don't give me that environmental crap. But as far as an Antarctic Defense Force, I have no doubt it's down there. They're probably not very public. It's a multinational navy that enough countries, you can share the burden, which is just patrol the waters. You don't have to tell them anything. It's like any soldiers know. You're not paid to know what's going on. You're paid to follow orders, and that's what they do. There's just scare away people to get anywhere close. Enough monitoring systems. Plus, remember, it's not like they have a lot of places you can hide on the ice. If it was a jungle, oh yeah, there'd be poachers all over the place. But on the ice, you are out in the open at all times, and it's amazing what one plane or a helicopter can cover if and it's a white background on top of it. Any human beings would stick out like a sore thumb from 50 miles out.
It's interesting, though, because you talk about desolate or difficult to get to, and I also think of our traditional view of space. But for in the day it was Admiral Byrd, but I would definitely put Richard Branson and Elon Musk up against there as great explorers, and they're not deterred from the money and the desolation and the difficulty of space. So it is odd that gentlemen like that have tried to make a foray into Antarctica. Well,
what do they get out of it? Antarctica isn't sexy. Antarctica, it doesn't grab headlines. Anything space grabs headlines, and the mainstream media cultivates it. And deliberately so. You got to remember the beat, the space beat, the globe beat is the underlying subtext of every story you ever hear in space. For example, by that I mean all they want you to do is notice the headline. You don't even have to read the article. So when someone says, "Oh yeah, there's something that could be a face on Mars," that's because the second you see that, you're thinking, "Well, then Mars is real because I'm on a globe." There's a hexagon on the top of Saturn because you're on a globe. Pluto's been reclassified. There's a probe that's going to leave the solar system, and so on and so on. And now when you're bringing in the civilian markets, and actually Richard Branson's kind of fallen out. They're leaning everything on Elon Musk now. And the headlines that he is generating recently are amazingly bold. I mean, ridiculously bold, to the tune of, he says that, look, what, 9 months he's going to send 2 tourists around the moon and back. I was like, really? You're going to send 2 tourists around the moon and back? With what pilots? With what capsule that you haven't tested? With what booster rocket you haven't tested? You're going to do this by 2018? No, you're not. You're just making this headline so the media grabs onto something, and then 6 months from now you're going to say it's postponed. Like the Google X Prize that was announced beginning of this year. You guys probably don't even remember it, where they said, oh yeah, Google's going to pay $20 million to any country that can put a probe on the moon and send pictures back. The Americans signed up, the Japanese, the Europeans, the Indian, and the Israeli. I didn't know Israel had a space program, but that's all right. But the catch was they had to launch by December 31st, 2017. That's only a couple months from now. So what happens 2 months from now, or 6 weeks ago? What happens? Of course, it was like, oh yeah, we're going to postpone that launch date, the drop dead date, until the end of March 2018. And you can almost guarantee that in January they'll kick it down the road, and just keep kicking that can. Same thing with the Orion program. Elon Musk has come and said, oh yeah, we're gonna colonize Mars by 2025. It's a great headline, but people's attention spans are so short that he could come out 2 years from now and say the same thing, and people will forget that he announced it 2 years ago. In fact, the story he came out with just 3 weeks ago, which just slayed me because I've literally heard this story since the 90s, was he's going to invent a super plane. Literally, I've heard the story. You guys can look up the archives on this one. A super plane that can travel from Los Angeles to Tokyo in 39 minutes. Don't know where he came up with 39 minutes. Where it launches way above the atmosphere, this big high arcing flight, and then come down. Right? I've heard this story. This is not a new story. People have been talking about the super planes forever. But what made the wrinkle different with Elon Musk is he said, oh yeah, by the way, and it's going to cost the same as an economy airline ticket. It's like, okay, now you are just talking crap. The first part, that was a stretch, but now you're going to say, and it's dirt cheap? Come on, man. You know how long it would take to put in a program like that? When the Puerto Rico thing happened, when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, he comes out and says, oh yeah, our company technology can get those guys' power back up in 6 months.
I saw that.
Where are you coming up with that number? You helped a town of 30,000 people generate some power with your technology, and it took quite a while. You're going to do an island of 2 million people or whatever that is? You're going to get them up and running? It's ridiculous. You want me to compare it to something? You're thinking, well, no, it could happen. Elon might be able to come up with something. All right, I'll give you a good example of how this got missed. You guys remember if you're into conspiracy stuff, you probably watched some movies. You remember the movie Who Killed the Electric Car? Does that movie ring a bell to you?
I remember that title. Yeah.
Kinda. It's okay. Let me ask you this: have you ever heard of the hydrogen fuel cell car? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay, but probably not a lot of bells. You're like, hey, whatever happened to those things? Man, that was what America was going to run on, was hydrogen fuel cell cars. That was the thing. And why was it going to be hydrogen? Because remember, if the oil and gas company, whatever replacement fuel it is going to be, you've got to control it. And what they are good at, on top of other things, is gas, hydrogen gas. The oil and gas companies have the market on hydrogen gas. So that's what they're going to do, hydrogen fuel cell. There's a reason why those cars were invented. They set up all these filling stations in California, and it was going to be a great thing, right? And that's how it was going to start. Why did they start in California? Because it was permanently warm weather in California. Why did they do that? Because hydrogen fuel cell cars had a problem with running in cold weather. And I mean problem to where they weren't going to run. And they thought, okay, we'll see if we can fix the bug. It was a major design flaw. We'll see if we can fix that while we get California up and running. They could not fix it. And so quietly, very quietly, hydrogen fuel cell cars disappeared. They just went. They tore down the signs. They took out the stations. The cars are gone. It's all over, and they didn't tell anybody. That's what happens in the, we see the stories in the mainstream media where things will happen, but we don't see it when they don't happen. It's like, okay, here's our lofty goal. If it doesn't make it, no one talks about failure. And that was one of the big failure things that happened. You say, okay, why is it, you're off topic, Mark. Why is this tied to Elon Musk? What I'm saying is the Elon Musk can talk about all this stuff all he wants. It's never, ever, ever going to happen. And you've got to commit it to memory, these things that he's saying, because all it's doing is reinforcing the globe. NASA has shifted the responsibility off to the civilian market, and really just one company, and it's filled with NASA engineers. It's just NASA in another wrapper. That's all it really is. Meanwhile, NASA takes their $19 billion, that's $50 million a day that we've been paying them to do nothing. The average American doesn't even know we don't have a space shuttle program anymore. We don't even, that's been decommissioned for years now. There is no, we've never even attempted to go to the moon since 1972.
Yes.
In fact, let me throw another one out at you. Which is, it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. It's like, really? Okay, fine. You think the Americans can't go to the moon since 1972? And I don't believe they ever went, of course. But why didn't any of the other countries? Why? It was a space race. Remember that space race we were talking about earlier? Why did the Russians just stop? Have you ever heard of a marathon race when the first person crosses the finish line, everybody else just walks off the course? That's what we're talking about. The Russians just quit, and the reason they quit is because if you're going to shoot the whole thing in a sound studio, Stanley Kubrick style, you can't have two studios and two countries and even have a prayer of continuity. Meaning, we shoot in one studio, the Russians shoot in another studio. What are the odds that their color palette is going to be the same as ours? And their rocks are going to look the same, and their dirt is going to look the same, and the gravity effects and all the special effects are going to work out exactly the same. We couldn't even do this in Hollywood studios now. No. Even if they were talking to each other, it would be a tall, tall order, even if they were across the street from each other. So, again, like Antarctica, they said, well, you know what? Let's just have one program. The Americans. Russians will just quietly shut that thing down. Even though they supposedly were beating the pants off of us for years and years and years, they just stopped. And because they were the Russians, not the Americans, remember, the media, not so much social outcry is allowed there, they got away with it. And we just, America waved the flag, you Russians, you suck. And that was it. We got away with it. It was fantastic. And that was part of the whole militarizing of space and keeping it secret. And then, of course, once they got to the moon and they did it rapid fire, it's like, oh, let's go there and back, there and back, there and back. Remember, it wasn't just Apollo 11. It was Apollo 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way through 16. And those trips, and sorry, I know I'm rambling. Let me throw out one more quick thing here, which is...
Oh, hold that thought right there, Mark. We are uptight against a break.
Oh, we are up against time.
Man,
okay, go ahead.
Cooperation to reinforce the global view versus the flat earth theory. We are talking with Mark Sargent, author of Flat Earth Clues. You're listening to The Existence of Strange Things here on Radio Memphis. We will be right back with more after this.
Segment 4 is rolling.
Welcome back to The Existence of Strange Things here on Radio Memphis. This is Stephen Gunther.
And this is Joel Martin.
And we're visiting with our guest, Mark Sargent, the author of Flat Earth Clues, The Sky's the Limit. You can find more about Mark on his website at www.enclosedworld.com and also on his YouTube channel. And you can pick up the Flat Earth Clues video series, which was really a lot of fun. We just finished up the last segment talking about Antarctica, but we didn't quite get everything done. We ran out of time, had to do some business. But coming back, Mark, with that thought, we've had this whole thing we've been reading about the last year or two about other dignitaries and important people in politics and religion. John Kerry, one of the English princes, King Juan Carlos and his wife, one of the leaders of one of the major religions, all heading down to Antarctica. And there are people that speculate that perhaps it's alien tech or an alien base or the old Nazi base that people have talked about. But coming back to you, is this a lie on another lie? Is it really about the wall?
Part of it is a lie, and you're right. It is really about the wall. But the whole story, that part of the story, starts in an unlikely place, and that is Leonardo DiCaprio.
Really?
Right. Okay.
If you remember this, and that is was it the end of last year? Oh, I'm gonna have to look it up now. Time flies. where what happened was that every once in a while, the Pope is a very, very busy man out in the Vatican, and every once in a while some A-list celebrities from various countries will come to meet him. And even an A-list celebrity, top-of-the-line actor like Leonardo DiCaprio, who was only allowed 15 minutes with the Pope to talk about climate change. Remember, it used to be global warming. Now it's climate change.
Right.
So he goes out there, and they had a camera crew filming him. Remember, you got 15 minutes to talk to the Pope, right? It's really just kind of like shake hands. Hey, think about climate change. Thank you. Goodbye. That's really it. All you can do in 15 minutes. But he's talking to him, and he gives him a book. And this book has various classic paintings in it. And one of the paintings, the only one that he pointed out to the Pope specifically, was you guys can look this up. It's called The Garden of Earthly Delights, and by Hieronymus Bosch.
The Garden of Earthly Delights.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Which is an interesting painting because it's one of the few paintings that actually has a casing with a painting on top of it. So the casing of the painting is an enclosed world. It is a flat earth with a dome on top, and you open it up, and it is sort of this nirvana type place on the inside. But when Leonardo's describing it to him, and he's doing it in English, he's saying, oh yeah, this painting was held over my crib as a child, and to me it represents a promise of hope and the future, something to that effect. And it's like, okay, you're supposed to be talking to this guy about climate change. Why are you bringing up an enclosed world painting, a flat Earth? Oh, you don't know. And he said, this painting was back from a time when we thought the world was flat. He actually said that, and I made it, ripped it out of a video and put it in, ripped it off the news and put it in a video. And not only was it flat, but it was a promise of, the future, enlightenment and the future. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, why is this even happening here? It's like, okay, I'm telling my friends, it's like, oh yeah, by the way, Leonardo DiCaprio mentioned the Earth was flat to the Pope, and people thought it was like a joke, like the Pope walks into a bar, that type of thing. So that started a chain reaction of events that even now I'm still trying to figure out the nuances of it, which is after that, the Vatican Pope, he goes down to Cuba and visits with a Russian Orthodox Pope, the first meeting of these two types of leaders in like 1,000 years. And there, whatever was happening behind closed doors, we still don't know. The normal Pope leaves. I call him the normal Pope, and I'm not trying to disparage the Pope. And the Orthodox Pope, he travels down to Antarctica for no apparent reason, from Cuba. This is not a cold weather type of guy. And he goes down there, and he has a few pictures, could not make this up, with penguins, because that's what you do when you're down there. Right. And he does this little ceremony in this tiny Russian Orthodox church on the beach in Antarctica, because that's apparently where you build some Russian Orthodox churches.
It's an outreach mission.
Yeah, it's an outreach mission in the most desolate place on Earth. And then whatever happens off camera, we don't know. And he's down there. And some of the other people, John Kerry, that's a perfect example. He's down there, and this was, just before the election. In fact, he's down there on election night, right? His main girl is in the race, right? Election night, and you'd think he'd be involved in the election, right? Secretary of State, that sort of thing. And he is not. He is down in Antarctica for whatever reason. Won't say why. Obama made a trip down at the end of his term and end of his campaign down at southern Chile. And there's speculation that he was down there as well and made this jump because they couldn't come up with a good excuse for him to go there, so they just got him close and then they just snuck him over. One of the more high-profile guys that was down there recently over the last 12 months was Buzz Aldrin, I believe. No, wait. No, it wasn't Buzz. Was it Buzz or crap? You'll have to look this up. It was definitely one of the others. It was either Glenn. No, it wasn't Glenn. Crap.
I can't remember either, but it was one of the astronauts.
One of the remaining 7 Apollo astronauts was down there, and he had to be airlifted off for health reasons. The bigger question is, why was he down there in the first place? Like, as far as bucket list things go, you could have gone down there anytime. Why were you waiting until now? The story of the There was a rumor circulating around before the Orthodox Pope went down there that the Russian fleet had also sent something down there. There was some ark, like an Ark of the Covenant type thing. You heard about that weird lightning strike that supposedly, no, not lightning strike, it was trampling. This Middle Eastern ceremony, and I can't remember which country, I'm sorry, I'm missing a few details here, where a Middle Eastern ceremony where people panicked because of a storm, and there was like 1,000 men died because of a trampling, and then other people in the story said no, it was a lightning strike or some energy beam or something like that. So it was tied to this ark, this weird Ark of the Covenant type of device, and that was shipped by the Russians down to Antarctica. So all these things that were happening down there. Now, who were they dealing with down there? Is there an ancient civilization? Is there a high-tech group that is down there? Is it the Nazis? No, it is not the Nazis. But to that effect, I've got to mention, kind of backtracking a bit, the 1946 Operation Highjump, where Admiral Byrd was supposedly rooting out the last of the Nazi forces in Antarctica. Nobody knows exactly what happened because the story, there's so much speculation on what happened. All we know is the Nazis aren't there anymore, and Admiral Byrd lived to fight another day. Some people said, well, they got in fight with spaceships and blah, blah, blah. The one story that caught my eye out of all the stories that swirled around Operation Highjump and the rooting out of the Nazi forces was that Nazi Germany tried to cut a deal with the ancient technology, the ancient civilization that was down there, and said, basically requested asylum, which has been known to happen with people. You request asylum, you get over the border, it's like, okay, but you're now going to be a citizen of ours, and you can never go back. And that was supposedly the same sort of deal they cut the Nazis. It's like, okay, fine, you don't want to deal with the Americans and the Soviets and everyone else. You can get off this thing, or you can come with us underground or wherever they were going to take them. But like a high school dance, you're not getting back in the gym, plain and simple. And that was it. And both problems were solved. The Nazis left, and they were safe, or maybe, we don't know for sure. And the Americans didn't have to deal with them anymore, and the world didn't have to deal with them anymore, and they never returned until the movie Iron Sky many years later, which was an interesting movie in itself. I can understand why it never made U.S. release. Have you guys even heard of Iron Sky?
I have not.
Oh my God, you gotta look up. You want to have some fun after this show? You will laugh. Type in, after this show is over, type Iron Sky trailer and just watch some of the trailers. You will absolutely understand why it never made it. It's an English movie too. Mm-hmm. It's in English, and it's about how Nazi Germany basically escaped to the far side of the moon and set up a base there, and was just waiting for years and years until they finally launched an attack against the entire world. And it's chilling. That's what it is.
Your book is very interesting, Mark. It's easy to read. I recommend it to all of our listeners and their friends and fans. It's available on Amazon. One of the problems with it is all week I've been doing homework. And I think that's what happens when you get into this. You got to dig a little more. I got to look this up. I got to check that out. And we were fact checking as best as we could and it's all there. We talked about the people going to Antarctica and all the things we're discussing. But not that it's a drawback, but I can tell you that we both did a lot of research, and your book is well footnoted and everything. It was great. But there's a lot of digging. I know you did too.
A great distraction from everything that's going on, outside our four walls. This was really a great distraction, and
cool.
It's been really just a good time tonight with you, Mark.
And it's really well annotated too. Cool. I just looked it up. It was Buzz Aldrin. You were right.
Oh, it was Buzz Aldrin.
It was Buzz.
Oh, good. I was a little worried. Buzz was, in fact, he was caught just recently. Talk about jumping over to another administration, because Buzz transcends presidents. He was at a press conference with Trump recently, where Trump was going on about the space program. In fact, you can look this video up if you get a chance. Look up Buzz Aldrin, Flat Earth Poker Face. And he, my God, there's some people that have poker faces, and there are other guys do not play cards with them. Or do not let them play cards if they have any money, because they were going to lose it. And his facial it wasn't even a tick. He just was giving everything away. Basically, anything that Trump was saying about the space program, Buzz had no faith in whatsoever.
He looked like Winona Ryder at the Emmys. If you saw that he just googly-eyed and going all over the place. And
oh my God! And I know he's older,
see the eye
but
roll, you know.
oh yeah, it was bad. I felt bad for him. It was like, isn't there anybody? You know, don't you have guys that are like, pull the camera off of him? But I get it. You know, he's one of the surviving 7. By the way, that the fact that he survived, I got to mention that because it's one of my trap questions that I give to anybody that tries to challenge the flat Earth. People say, well, you know, what questions can I give people? How can I stump them? Okay, here's the 90-second question, which you can do. It is not hard, but you have to know you got to know the details in order to get the question out. Which is the question you throw at anybody who goes against flat Earth. It's like, okay, here you go. Yes or no answer. Are the Van Allen radiation belts deadly? Yes or no? And that's the question you throw at them. And if they know anything about science, if they think I'm well versed in science, you know, I've got a master's or a PhD in such and such. So you ask them that question: Van Allen belts deadly? Yes or no? And the reason why it's a trap question is this: if they say yes, it's deadly, then I say, okay, then how did Apollo 8 through Apollo 17, and I'm not going to exclude 9 because technically it's in there, Apollo 8 through 17 make round trips through the Van Allen radiation belts, round trips there and back, hours and hours in a deadly radiation belt with no shielding? How did the astronauts get back from that? Meaning, you know, all the astronauts, you can take pick, you can look through the list. Nobody died, nobody got radiation poisoning, nobody even got cancer. The capsules were put into the Smithsonian. They're not ticking, you know, with Geiger counters. How did they make it through it? If you think it's deadly. That's the big question, because there is no shielding. This is not secret information. You can look up the specs. It is aluminum and plastic. Because remember, rockets have to be light, like airplanes. You know, it's basically the same shielding as an airplane, as a commercial airliner. How did they make it through it? And nobody has an answer. And so then, you know, the other side is, well, they say no, they're not deadly. I go, okay, they're not deadly. Fine. You go to the NASA website, you can look it up online. It's not hard to find. Type in Orion Trial by Fire. It is literally a movie, won a local Emmy down in Texas, made by NASA, put on television. It's sitting on their archives right now. And it talks about how the Orion project is going to be unmanned until they can solve the deadly radiation belt problem. They're not going to send any capsules through the belt because they can't solve, literally they say, they haven't figured out how to solve the radiation problem. 2 big issues with that little movie, which is not even 8 minutes long. The first one is, okay, you just said that we can't figure out how to solve the radiation problem, even though you solved it in 1967. And you kept solving it. You didn't have any problems with it whatsoever. Never had a flaw with the radiation problem. So why are you saying you have a problem with it now? The second problem with that movie is it was made in 2014. So what happened? 1967, 2014, you lost the shielding technology? What's happening here? It's the production value of NASA. Sometimes I think they're lazy. Sometimes I think they're incompetent. Other times I think they can't hide it. It's part of the rules. I'm not sure, but that's the trap question I throw at people. And where they usually get stuck is a clever science guy will not. You'll know if they're in trouble because they will not answer it yes or no. They'll say, well, it depends. If they open it with that, they're screwed, because that means they know they don't have anywhere to go with it. They say, well, you know, Van Allen didn't really mean it. And that's also a big problem with Van Allen. He announced the Van Allen radiation belts in 1959. Says, oh yeah, humans can't go past this. Well, then Kennedy comes into power, and Kennedy says, you know, we chose to go to the moon in this decade, and blah, 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 that whole speech.
Right.
And, well, then what do you think happened? The media went straight back to Van Allen, and they said, hey, how are you guys going to get past that? You know what his answer was? His answer was, we're going to go real fast. Literally, that was it. That was the technical answer, which was, we're going to floor it. And that'll be the problem. It's like, well, if you were going to floor it, then why was it a problem in the first place? And even if that was the answer, sorry, I know you're going to say something real quick, but even if that was the answer,
Flooring it going out, that's fine because you get a big rocket at your back, right? Coming back, though, you're hitting the brakes. Remember, you're coming back into Earth, and you're talking this tiny capsule with a tiny little motor. You're actually spending more time in the belts on the way back. So that whole flooring argument doesn't play either. So how'd you do it? You didn't. That's how they did it. They just said they did it, and everybody bought it. So there you go. My other little.
It's a good man answer. It was all I was going to say. You floor it, hit it with a hammer, or turn it off and turn it on again. Pretty much solves everything.
Oh yeah. Well, remember the lowest common denominator understands that. When you say floor it, oh yeah, they totally get it. We're gonna go. They're just gonna. You can almost hear the hicks with a hay. No offense if you have relatives like this. With a hayseed in their mouth, saying, "Well, they're just gonna floor it, go real fast." Yeah, totally got that. My Chevy, I floor that thing all the time.
Exactly. Well, even at that, some of these are points that are always going to be argued, and there's debunking sites on both sides of the theory here and the argument. I don't know that they'll ever be resolved enough to persuade everyone at one time to come over to this theory. But one of the questions I have, I guess, is like the deeper ones, Mark. I want to talk about who were the dome builders and who's running this, and it's unclear. All the things that I have read, whether it's divine, at which point we don't need machinery, if you will, and Oompa Loompas and people to run the machinery, if there is some, or are we? The only thing that came up with is it is an exterior force. And then I was thinking about the different options, and it's either, as you said, a terrarium, which is generally not a good thing for people that are inside the terrarium. So are we an exhibit in a zoo? Are we a petri dish? Or are we a school, in a metaphysical term to learn some things? And if we put a purely metaphysical spin on it, are we a school to learn? Are we a zoo exhibit? Are we a petri dish? And to add on to that before you answer, if we take into these accounts of alien abduction and things, is that somebody plucking us with some tweezers out of the petri dish to do some experimenting?
I think there are multiple levels to this thing. Meaning it is complex in a certain way. Steal another movie reference, Contact, with Jodie Foster when they were building the giant machine. Just again, it's a globe reinforcement movie, but still, by multiple levels, I mean this. First off, to me, let's start off with one of your middle questions, which is it feels to me like it is an educational tool. It is, the world can only be one of three, one or a combination of three things: education, entertainment, or confinement. Well, if it's entertainment, I know most of the people I know are not having that great of a time. The entertainment thing, I don't think is that great. The line that I steal from The Matrix, which is, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. I think that's very true. Confinement, we're talking like a jail scenario, prison planet. If it's confinement, it's actually pretty nice for a jail. The only damage we seem to be doing is to each other. If you took humans off of this world, everything works really, really well, really efficiently.
But why would they have jailed us, thousands of years ago? We weren't that bad back then.
Well, we weren't, but then we go into the whole other aspect, which is how many versions of civilizations have there been here, and which one are we? So let's say we're like version 7. Who was version 6? Who was version 5? And so on and so on. What version lived on here when the continents were all one big clump in the center? And by the way, the supercontinent Pangea only works on a flat Earth. It does not work on a globe, because if it's on a globe, how does it spread so evenly? And let's throw in another little cool wrinkle to the globe, which is if you're looking at the Mercator map on any map that you can look at the globe too if you wanted. Why do all the pointy bits, like the Baja California and Norway and tip of South America, why do all the pointing bits point south to the South Pole? Why doesn't anything point north? It's really obvious. You take a Mercator map and just spin it upside down. Everything points in one direction. Well, that doesn't make sense on a globe either. But if you look at it on a flat map, they don't all point south. They all point out, which would be natural. That would be one of the natural formations if it was in that configuration. So who was the versions, when the continents were looped up? And then, of course, when you go back to version 1, then people start thinking along the biblical lines, which is like, okay, maybe we weren't part of the prison planet. Maybe there was another group that was locked in here, because that really comes down to it. Are we here because we were meant to, a petri dish type thing, or are we here because we're being protected? So, like, for example, one of the things I said is like, is our civilization, or is our world, are we a box of kittens that has to be shielded from the outside because there's monsters out there? Or are we a box of scorpions that really should not, under any circumstances, be allowed to run amok, into other worlds? Because, as you know, human beings, and we've touched on this in different science fiction movies, are dangerous. We love to conquer all sorts of stuff, and we really have no limits.
Manipulate.
Why are you leaving out the box of rats?
Well, okay, the box of rats. The box of rats is possible. I mean, it's a kind of a good mix. But at the same time, I don't think we're just an experiment. I think we're here to learn a lesson. Confinement, entertainment, education. I don't think it's necessarily confinement. It's, as far as jails go, I can think of way better ways to torture us. But at the same time, education, school kind of fits the same thing. Like when you go to school, or if you've been to school, I mean, yeah, you had some fun every once in a while, but for the most part, it was kind of low-grade suffering. It was like, oh, I don't want to learn this. Why isn't this day end? It's 3 o'clock.
You had to tolerate it.
Yeah, you had to tolerate it. And it was kind of confinement, because while you were in school, you weren't supposed to go anywhere. And if you tried to go anywhere, you'd get into trouble, normally, unless you could figure out a clever way of doing that. I think that's where we are sometimes. Here, you want me to throw you a weird wrinkle on this?
We're in that business. Go ahead.
Okay. What about, let's say this. Let's say there was an old civilization that lived here long before us, way before the sunken cities off of Japan, and the sunken cities off of India, and the Bosnian pyramids, and the normal pyramids. I was there. They are not 5,000 years old. They are, I think, way, way, way older. But that's a whole other thing. Before those civilizations, maybe there was a great civilization, a group that was way more powerful than us, and they were trapped here. Well, in a problem-solving world, what if they got clever and decided, well, maybe we can't figure out a way out, but maybe future civilizations can, so they go underground. Because it doesn't take much. We're living in a very, very shallow atmospheric level. Remember, 0 to 1 mile up, that's most of where we live. You create a subterranean system that's only 10 miles high. It'd be very, very comfortable. That's an apartment I'd rent. So these people are down there, whoever they are, and they let future civilizations try to figure out what's going on and maybe invent proprietary technology they haven't thought of. It's part of the creative process, right? So, because maybe they could figure out, let's say it's a prison planet. Again, I'm just spitballing here. If it's a prison planet, well, maybe we can come up with a way to get out that they couldn't. But here's the kicker. You have to let them develop naturally. Because if they know they're being watched, sort of like why the dome's there. If they know they're being watched, they're not going to act naturally. So you can't interfere. So you can't just show up on Main Street anywhere, sign pictures, say, oh, by the way, we're an advanced civilization. Take a few selfies and be done with it. You let the civilization develop, and then they come up with their own tech. You may be able to help them here and there, but you want to see what they do. So what's the first thing we do? Atomic weapons, crude, powerful, but crude. What do we do after that? Well, maybe HARP technology. Ooh, frequencies. That's not bad. What can you do with that? Still's not working. The dome isn't even cracking. But what's one of the side effects of HARP technology? Ooh, maybe weather modification. That might be useful. What else are we working on recently? Oh, how about the CERN system? That's pretty good. How about bypassing any direct contact? Maybe you can create a wormhole or some sort of gateway that you can sneak out, sort of a backdoor type situation. But again, all of these technologies have to be developed somewhat naturally, where they create their own solutions. Anyway, I know I'm kind of going off into distant places here, but a short version is this. We are not the first people to rent this apartment where we are right now. Not a chance. No, this is not a one-off. I believe that a system this good and this efficient, you can create multiple systems, and you can even have survivors of previous civilizations to where they maybe, I do not think that for a second that that the world was empty when we showed up, meaning another civilization had to be moved off in order for us to show up. And after, when our time has come, another civilization will follow us. But remnants of previous civilizations, take your pick, Atlantis, Mu, the Babylonians, the Sumerians,
Lemuria.
who knows?
Yeah.
There you go. Any of the ones that had advanced technology, mostly using unified field engines, which of course we cannot use because once you have a unified field engine, you're going to figure out where this place is in about 30 minutes. Once those are put in place, there's protocols in effect. And let me share that. And you think, oh, Mark, you're kind of going off the rails here. And you guys, I know, aren't stopping me, but that's fine. Let's go a different way. And that is, what if these previous civilizations have always been there with us, but they aren't allowed to have direct contact for obvious reasons, because they can influence religion, they can influence technology, they can influence culture permanently. The greatest UFO sighting of all time, in your opinion, either of you, take your pick, is what? Do you have a favorite?
Go, Joel.
Anybody?
They're just too many for me to pick a favorite.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But they're usually small. It's nothing epic and huge.
No, you're right. It's always kind of on a smaller scale.
Got it. Have either of you ever heard of the 1561 Nuremberg event?
No.
1561?
1561 Nuremberg event. You can look it up. This is not secret information. There's even a wiki entry on it. 1561, Nuremberg, Germany, April, beautiful spring day. There's people sitting down to breakfast, right? It's like at 8 a.m. or something. They're having their bratwurst and Schnitzengluben, whatever they have for breakfast in Germany in 1560. And two giant space armadas just show up over the city. One is using spherical craft. The others are using crafts that apparently resemble crosses or like X's and O's. Go figure. And they start duking it out, just hammering each other over this thing. Basically, giant space aircraft carriers with fighters just launching and going to town. For an hour, they went and fought over this city. To the point where the people below, finish breakfast, reading the paper, walking the dog. These things just keep hammering and hammering away to where the sketch artists for the newspapers actually came out and drew the whole damn thing. And the only reason it stopped was because after an hour, a third faction showed up. A giant, singular, black craft. Angular, pointy thing. This giant, singular ship showed up. And pulled up right in between them. The other two groups scatter. And then the angular ship pulls away slowly. Never to be seen again. Now, they even talked about this in Ancient Aliens at one point, which was cool because I didn't know they had. But they left out the third faction, the black angular craft, and I was wondering why they left that out of the show. It's like, look, it's in the newspaper thing you're probably looking at right now if you're looking it up online. The picture in full color is beautiful. Not a cloud in the sky. It's April. It's not sundogs. They even supposedly had things crash, off to the side. They can even tell who was winning, apparently. But it raises so many questions about hierarchy, and I'm sure it wouldn't take much for you guys to imagine this. One would be, okay, who were the two factions to begin with? Why were they fighting over a major metropolitan city? Because Nuremberg, Germany in the 1560s is a pretty big place, right? Who was the third faction? Why did they? And then, who is the hierarchy? What's the hierarchy? What is the third faction in comparison to these two? Is it the cops? Is it the UN? What weapon technology did they have? Why did they only have one ship? Why did the others not even engage them? Why did they take off so fast? Was it like a turf war between the sharks and the jets from West Side Story, and then the cops show up? How did this play out? On top of that, it took them an hour for those guys to get there. That is not a great response time when it comes to space travel or rocket ships, as far as I'm concerned. What took so long for the alarm bells to go off before all this was resolved? And when it was recorded, why didn't they bother shutting the whole thing down, blowing up the printing presses? Unless they thought, well, it's not photography, and photography wouldn't even be invented for a long, long time after that. Why did it take everything so long? Why did it happen? It raises so many questions, but everything I was looking at struck me as a hierarchy, meaning what I was talking about earlier, where you have multiple civilizations, remnants of previous civilizations, be it Lemuria, be it Mu, be it Atlantis. But these civilizations have protocols they have to follow. I am sure those two groups got in trouble at some point. You know, they had a good talking to, maybe sanctions, who knows. But they weren't allowed to continue fighting for a very specific reason, which is they knew even back then, it's like, okay, it will influence the town, but because they had no reference point, here's the luck, or why it probably was allowed, was because nobody in the 1500s, science fiction wasn't even a term, because science wasn't even a term. So they were allowed to do it. It's like, well, in fact, the locals, if you read the paper, kind of it struck them as a religious event because that was the only context they had. And we're going to say, well, it was angels versus devils, but it was the only thing they could talk about because all they had really was religious texts. And a lot of people couldn't even read or write.
We're going to have to,
anyway.
I'm sorry, Mark, we're going to have to take another break again. This is going so fast tonight.
Okay.
This is incredible. This is really good stuff. Not going to let you off that easy. When we come back, to use your metaphor of the apartment, I still want to know who's painting and cleaning the carpet. Okay. Who's in charge of the thing. You're listening to The Existence of Strange Things on Radio Memphis, and we'll be right back.
Segment 5 is rolling.
Welcome back into The Existence of Strange Things here on Radio Memphis. I'm Joel Martin.
And this is Stephen Gunther.
And tonight we are visiting with Mark Sargent via Skype, talking about his book, Flat Earth Clues, and just talking about this flat Earth theory. Mm-hmm. Mark, when we left off before the break, we were really getting you wound up and just blowing my mind about, the builders, right, if you will, the creators of this environment we live in. And you shared the neat story from back in the 1500s out of Nuremberg. And then, Stephen and I, during the week, we've been talking, who's pulling the strings, who crafted all of this. Right. What are your thoughts on this, Mark?
Well, let's circle back to one of my original comments. If all the world's a stage, who built the stage? Because we're just players on it. So, two different ways you could look at it. One is divine, of course. Is the outer marker, is the dome, does the dome have on it the handprint of God? Which a lot of people would lean towards, because look, 8 out of every 10 people in the world does belong to one of the big religions. Or did God subcontract out the work? Meaning, is it an advanced civilization? I mean, let's face it, if a golden spaceship, egg-shaped, decided to park itself in the northern part of Europe and come out, and a bunch of really good-looking people showed up and they were glowing and everything, there was a lot of people that would look at them as divine, even though they might just be an advanced technology. Either way, the one of the reasons why the flat Earth resonates so well with people, not only is it easy to understand, the basic framework is easy to understand, but it's a big message of hope, because if all the world's a stage or it was created, then there's a creator, and if there's a creator, you definitely aren't alone. One of the big things that stems through all of humanity is our fear of being alone. Nobody really likes it, and that's what it cures what ails you, and that's one of the big ones. So my personal opinion, do I think that it's divine? I tend to lean that way, and that's why when I was doing the clues, I kind of talked about but even though I didn't mention it by name, the Tower of Babel story. Yeah. Which is, if the Tower of Babel doesn't make any sense if you're on a spinning globe that's also flying around the sun, which is also flying around the galaxy. But it makes perfect sense if you're in a stationary dome structure, because then you know how high it is to get to the top, and you're just building a bridge, which is how it's described in Genesis. The story of, that God thought that the civilization that was down there was good enough, they were making a bridge to heaven. And it looked like they were going to pull it off, so he had to put the kibosh on that pretty quick. So for me, yeah, I think it does lean towards the divine. Do I think what you guys were mentioning earlier? Who are the janitors? Who are the custodians of this place? Who's taking care of maybe the inside of it? Who's the superintendents? Could be some of the older civilizations, but I think a lot of this place is automated, meaning even God has his tools. What I'm saying here, the tools that we interpret are divine are limited to our technological abilities. So back in olden times, they thought God worked with, a magic hammer and a chisel. As things got more advanced, God had more advanced tools to where now, I think life imitates life. And that is, I think God is a developer. More than anything, his tools are much more refined. As we get more technologically advanced, the tools get smaller and smaller and smaller, to where now we're dealing with language as a tool. We're writing languages that can operate machinery and can build more machinery. So it's a complex machine, but yet it's simple. And I think there are automated systems here that the custodians and older civilizations don't necessarily have to mess with, like the jet stream, which can, is the upper atmosphere. That's the equivalent of air conditioning. The underwater conveyor system, which controls all the flow of currents throughout the oceans. That's more like, like jets in a hot tub. The star system, also automated, which is just really a glorified clock and navigation tool, with the stars and the planets, and the sun and the moon for that point. The sun also, heats, the moon cools. The sun isn't its only heating method of heating things. The underwater conveyor system generates huge amounts of energy and carries it around. Same with the jet stream. And, of course, the most controversial, the one I catch the most flack for, is the underground magma system, which is, what is it? People say, well, no, the magma system in volcanoes, you can't tell me that isn't organic. I'm going, really? Because if you're going to build a system this sophisticated, are you really going to leave something to chance? No. This thing is way too well designed to leave anything to something organic. I mean, if you build a terrarium for your spider, your tarantula, right? The lamp's in there, the wall's in there, there's a little food dish, a little water dish, all these other things. Are you really going to take a chance that the ground that it's sitting on is going to be completely organic and something random could happen? Because remember, one super volcano happens in this place, and it's game over. And that's not how it's going to play out. It's the disasters and all the things we've told people throughout time. Those are just scary stories. You talk around campfires. The grand plan, the big grand revelation, well, that's still yet to be unfolded. But for me, this has been a journey not so much of problem resolution and trying to decipher the world. It's been a spiritual journey, which is, it answered my question almost immediately, which was, are we alone? And if we aren't alone, if there has been somebody looking over our shoulder, and I'm not saying it's like a parent sitting on the couch looking over the top of the newspaper, making sure the kids aren't burning anything down, but at the very least, there is some casual coaxing that's going on, and definitely some monitoring. But for me, and I've always been a fairly nice guy. I didn't really do that many things to bad people. This changes everything. If people find out about this, then everything changes. Meaning, do we still go to war if you're still all in the same boat? Do you fire a cannon on the guy across from you on the other side of the hill if technically if you're in the same building with each other? Do you commit hate crimes? Do you do anything bad? I'll go so far as to say that I will never do a malicious thing towards anyone ever again, even if threatened at gunpoint, because of what I believe the system is. And that is, it's a place that keeps score. There's a tally on what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And that may be a little bit of cheating, but it's what I believe. I mean, I wouldn't have probably done it anyway, but now I definitely won't do it.
It seems like that takes a measure of free will out of it. You had mentioned earlier that 8 out of 10 people already would identify as one of the 5 major religions, which you would think would drive them to better behavior and not war and all these other things. And I don't know. It seems as though if we take the faith equation out and we say, well, if we see the outer barrier and we know, then we'll behave differently.
You would behave differently only because now there's proof. Remember, all the major religions of this world have been looking for the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings. Everybody's been looking for a magical, mystical device. Why? Because for them, it is the proof that their religion is validated. Up until now, nobody's had it. The Spear of Destiny. Nobody's got Harry Potter's wand. Something that we're actually saying, look, it's supernatural force. Everybody's looking for it, though. And what you would be simultaneously giving all those religions is something akin to proof of the divine. It may not be full of lightning and not be able to cure the sick, but it's there. And up until now, it hasn't been, meaning science has been beating everybody over the head with their textbooks for a long, long time, saying not only is it not there, you're never going to find it because it doesn't exist. And all of a sudden, you give those, all those people, that think of the spiritual shockwaves that it would send through everything when people figured this out. I mean, congregations would move to the ice. Churches would move to places where they never thought they would go possible. People would, life savings would be dissolved just so they could get closer to it. I mean, lots of people would look if the Holy Grail. I'm sorry, let's say the Ark of the Covenant. If that actually existed in a spot, it would be the biggest tourism draw of all time. Countries would fight and go to war just over that object. If the object was so big it encompassed everybody, well, then it's left up to human beings, and that is human instinct. What do you do? I think that, and here's the risk. It's a double-edged sword. If you tell people, oh yeah, by the way, there's proof over there that you're not alone and there's a higher power. The problem is that now there's a higher power, meaning there's a higher power than government. The whole essence of a government's power is that there's no one above them to countermand it, even if they don't have the ability to countermand it. There's the reason why the Air Force will never admit that there's UFOs out there is because the UFOs are better than the Air Force, a lot better. You can't rule the sky if you don't actually rule the sky. Same thing with this. Do you really rule the world? Does your government, you can be the strongest nation in the world. Yeah, but you didn't build the place, so why do I have to listen to you? You know what? I'm going to go to that church over at the edge of the ice. They seem to know what's going on. That's what would happen to a lot of people. Yeah, you're thinking, well, it wouldn't be that simple. No, it wouldn't be that simple, and it might take a while, but people would do it. It would change fundamentally everything, how you really act to people. In fact, there was. Let me give you a quick analogy. I know we're running out of time, but it's because of something like this. Because I get people that will come to me and say, "What does it matter?" 1 out of every 10 people says, "What does it matter?" Why does it matter? Again, I still have to go to my job in the morning. My wife doesn't listen to me. My kids hate me. Why does it matter? I go, it doesn't matter until the day that it does. If I tell you right now, whatever age you are, that you're adopted, you're just going to go into denial and say, whatever. You're not going to care. You're not going to care because you don't believe me. I'm going to just keep but then more people come to you and say, you know what? I think you're adopted, and then all of a sudden there's some evidence over here. Here's adoption papers from such and such. The more, sooner or later, your mind is going to shift over to that. Until it does, you don't care because it's just denial. You're going to say, no, I'm not adopted. But the second you do believe you're adopted, then everything changes. Every conversation you've ever had with your parents going all the way back to grade 1, you're going to think about it. And that's what we're really talking about here on a massive scale, because this reevaluates everything you've ever been told. There's ripples that carry back through time. So if all of us you run into this with flat earthers, when they finally flip, they get this weird feeling because all of a sudden they have to dig through memories going all the way back to their childhood of when they first saw the globe, and then they saw it again and they saw it again, because they realize that it was a deception, sort of like the adopted thing, only bigger. But that's the sort of implications. Again, the argument is okay. Why you don't care that you're adopted until you believe it, and then once you believe it, if there's proof or you're finally convinced, then it is the only thing you think about. Same thing with this. Until you believe that the earth is flat, it doesn't matter. You can go to work, everything's fine. But the second it happens, the second it becomes reality, that's all anyone's going to talk about. Mainstream media, every book, every magazine, that's all anyone's going to talk about. And if you still are in that much denial that it's not going to matter to you, there's nothing I can do for you, because all your neighbors are going to be talking about it. All the television channels, they're going to be talking about it. Every website is just going to be covering it for years and years and years, unless, of course, something bigger happens to distract you. But we haven't gotten that far yet. There you go. That's my rant.
Do you think that there will be a revelation during a certain time?
Yes, I do. You mean a flat Earth revelation or something else?
A flat Earth. Do you think it will be revealed to us, or do you think it'll be something that we figure out on our own?
Well, I was always hoping for the 100th monkey effect, and if you guys didn't know what that was, I thought that was fascinating. We've seen this in nature, and science, of course, will deny it and say, no, it never happened. It's like, no, it happened. Because why wouldn't it? It sounds like an update to a life form. And that was, the 100th monkey effect goes something like this. There's some monkeys in some islands off of Japan, I believe, and they were studying them. And every once in a while, the scientists would give them some potatoes, and they drop them off on the beach. These are monkeys that lived in the trees, but it was a coastal thing because it was Japan. And some of the monkeys figured out that if they washed the potatoes in the water, they were actually taste better because they didn't have to do all of that sand, right? And here's the weird part. Once enough monkeys started figuring this out, the monkeys started showing each other. And that part wasn't unusual. It's like, hey, look, you wash it off in the sand. They were mimicking each other. That's what monkeys do. When the 100th monkey was just a number they threw out there. But when it got to a certain population of the monkeys, they all knew automatically, even before they touched their first potato, to wash the sand off the potatoes. And you're thinking, oh, maybe it was. No, what's weird about that is that the same monkeys on the other islands that were not within swimming distance of this island also figured it out simultaneously. It was like all the monkeys were connected at some level, like the species was connected mentally through some sort of update. You want to call it part of the system? We don't know. And for me, I think that's what potentially could happen with us, is that once you get to a certain, that tipping point, you've all heard of the tipping point. Once the tipping point with enough people know about this, then it becomes a common acceptance. Oh yeah, they may not know it's flat, but if it's brought up to them, they're not going to fight it like they're fighting it now. And we've seen less and less resistance as the last 18 months has progressed, to where people are now it's a topic. For God's sakes, it's the stories just keep going more and more and more, and I see it in the vernacular, and I keep seeing it in different aspects. Now, could part of it be artificial? Yes. And do I think something else is coming? Yes. Do I think the flat Earth is also part of a bigger picture? Yes, I do. Do I know what that event is? No, but it's got to be huge. It'd have to be some sort of celestial event, or some sort of civilization would have to be introduced. It'd have to be, whatever it have to be, it would have to be novel, and it'd have to be very big, and it would have to be something that would be spread artificially through social media so everybody gets the same story. Because that's one of the reasons why I think we are where we are, is because the system that we're in, I used to think all you needed was high-speed internet, but that wasn't it. It wasn't you needed just high-speed internet. You needed smartphones, and you needed social media. Once all those things were in place, now, and the criminal thing, let's get our stories straight, right? You can spin the same story within minutes to anyone in an industrialized country with a phone. And that is very, very powerful. So now, no matter what happens.
Yeah, indeed.
No matter what happens, that's what can happen. So there you go. That's my what I think is going to happen.
Well, Mark, you've given us a lot to think about.
A lot to process.
A lot of
good luck sleeping.
But the long haul segment of your book, that chapter about the southern hemisphere air travel, I'm interested in aviation, and that right there hooked me with plausible that we have a flat Earth.
Oh yeah.
Just based on what you talk about with planes getting from point A to point B to point C, but they really shouldn't have to go to point B to get to point C in the southern hemisphere.
No, you're absolutely right. There was a travel agent down in the southern hemisphere who was a career travel agent. She said that you have no idea in the northern hemisphere how lucky you have it. We have people who complain constantly that you cannot get flights in the southern hemisphere nonstops between major cities. And I was going, wow, that's something. She goes, yeah, the connections are all over the place, and people complain. They go, why do we have to go to the northern hemisphere to get from South America to Africa? Why does that have to happen? And no matter how many people, in fact, I just talked to an air traffic controller. That was last night. Good Lord. Amazing how time flies. Where he said that when it comes to the airlines, it's all about money, and it's all about the price, the pounds of fuel that you save. He goes, no. He goes, we're talking about pilots that will beg for an extra 1 or 2 degree shave off their turn so they can save just a minute or two on their flights, because it's all about the profit margins. He goes, people taking those flights that double and triple their mileage in the southern hemisphere is the last thing they would do. It absolutely would not happen unless, of course, the Earth is not a globe. Those routes, I mean, remember, 95% of the flights in the southern hemisphere, try to just go on Priceline and plot one out. You have to make these double and triple connections, which is ridiculous. There's only a handful of nonstop flights in the southern hemisphere. And even those we can't completely verify. Now, are there some potential flaws with those things? Sure. There's some scaling issues that we still haven't figured out yet. But I think it would bother other people. It's like, why are there no nonstops in the southern hemisphere? I mean, the northern hemisphere, apparently, we're spoiled. We can get nonstops to anywhere. We can get a nonstop flight to your supermarket if you wanted to. And that's not the case with the southern hemisphere. That, and of course, the fact that GPS drops off, and that the global positioning system doesn't even track your flight once it gets out over open water if there's no islands between you and your destination, which is how the Malaysian flights disappeared. I mean, it's a 777.
I thought about that flight when reading that chapter. I thought about that Malaysian Airlines flight.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 777. It's a flagship. I'm up here in Boeing territory. We're very proud about our planes, and that's state of the art. And you're telling me the black boxes, you lost that plane? It's a global positioning system. There's 30-something satellites, blanket coverage. There should be no problem there. And that plane went down the ocean, gone. I mean, nobody has anything. You could say, well, it's a military cover-up, was this and that. It's like, look, with no wreckage at all? I mean, nobody could even find that plane. And that's because they couldn't find it because they didn't know where it was, because it wasn't on the radar. Because you're flying, and I said this in one of my clues, is look, you're flying blind. The pilots have a rough estimate of where they're going, but that's just going off gauges. They don't truly know until they hit the radar airspace, and then they have to course correct. It's brilliant. And then the GPS compensates for them, because the GPS says, oh yeah, here's where you were the entire time. And they just think it was a glitch. And then even if they knew it was a problem, they're never going to think flat Earth. They're just going to think it's a bug. So, yeah.
Well, I encourage everyone, if you have not gotten the book, Flat Earth Clues, and you can find it at Amazon. Do you have hard copies out in brick and mortar buildings in shopping centers, Mark?
No, I think it's actually just an Amazon. It's not brick and mortar buildings. You just go to Amazon, and if you buy the book, great, fantastic. If you don't feel like you want to read it and you want to listen to it, there's an audio book also on Audibles, and that's just me doing my thing. Or if you don't want to listen to it on Audibles, you can go to YouTube and find the rougher version, which is on YouTube, just called Flat Earth Clues. And, it'll take a little while because there's a lot of different mirrors of it out there. A lot of people, because I did Creative Commons license, gave away millions of hits. There's a lot of those out there, but some quality is better than others. So do what you can, but I highly recommend it. It'll change your life and your world.
And you've got the big conference coming up in Raleigh, North Carolina in November.
Yep.
Are there other conventions, I guess, around the flat Earth where people get together?
There's local ones. So if you want to know if there's a Flat Earth meetup in your city, you can just type in the name of your city and Flat Earth and meetup. So like Flat Earth meetup Phoenix, you can type that in, and you'll see when the last one was and when the next one might be. You can also type that into Google. There's probably some Facebook meetups that are happening. The next conference after this one will be in London. In April, I will be speaking at that one. I'm one of 2 Americans that's going over to speak at that one. It's mostly going to be a European group. And then there's another one in Amsterdam. I don't think I'm going to be speaking at that one because I don't think it's necessarily an English-based one. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and then there's documentaries that are being shot right now. We're crossing our fingers. There'll be movies put out, and people are still gunning for a Flat Earth reality show. But if that happens, it truly will be the end of the world, because I think every other reality show has been done.
Well, remind us once again where we can look for insights that you're putting out there. You'd mentioned your YouTube channel.
Yep, YouTube channel is Mark Sargent, Mark K. Sargent. The website is enclosedworld.com. The easiest way to find me literally is just go to Google and type in Flat Earth Clues, or type it into YouTube and you'll find it. And my phone number and my email address are still on my YouTube videos, which is fine. I don't mind. You can email me. You can text me if you want. I will not return texts, but I will read them, and I might respond to you via phone. I've never sent a text in my life, and I'm not going to. And yeah, other than that, it's you'll run into me eventually if you're looking into the Flat Earth at all. And honestly, the community is so big. Flat Earth Clues won't. I mean, it's a good introductory guide, but just type in Flat Earth into YouTube, and you will find a ton of content out there now. I mean, we're tracking bigger than most mainstream things. And if you're a new person to this, and a lot of you might be, type in Flat Earth Shortlist for new people, or just Flat Earth Shortlist, and it's a list of all sorts of great people that do introductory videos.
Well, it sounds really good. Mark, thank you so much for being with us here on The Existence of Strange Things tonight. Before Stephen and I let you go, as we do all of our guests, we have one parting question.
Yeah.
And it goes like this. Mark Sargent.
Yeah.
What is your favorite strange thing?
My favorite strange thing, and this will be unique just to you guys, right, is that the word strange is actually an anagram for one name. Do you know what that is?
Lay it on us, brother.
Sargent. Sargent.
Oh, yeah, you are good, and it's been a pleasure having you with us tonight. For myself, Joel Martin, our guest Mark Sargent, and my co-host Stephen Gunther, you've been listening to The Existence of Strange Things. So until the next time we're together, keep your eye to the sky and look all around for the existence of strange things.